call to order the January 19th, 2016 Currituck County Board of Commissioners meeting. This afternoon, I would like to ask the Reverend Glenn McCraney, retired Navy captain, to lead us in our prayer invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. All stand, please.
Let us pray. O Lord, you have commanded the light to shine out of the darkness. You call us again to praise your goodness and to ask for the bestowing of your divine favor. We thank you for the freedom to assemble today, the freedom to express ourselves openly without fear, the freedom to celebrate with others that which binds us together as a people and as a nation. Bless the deliberations and the agenda today, so our efforts and decisions will be made with insight and wisdom. Remind our commissioners that they are the stewards of the people. May they seek also to accomplish those goals for the enrichment of all people. Renew within them the strength of your Holy Spirit. And in this meeting as a people, we have anxieties and fears due to the recent events in our country and around the world. We oftentimes have a sense of helplessness and anxieties which are beyond our personal control. May we renew and place faith in you during these times. In these few moments, touch our hearts and the very depths of our spirits with your holiness, that each of us may sense your presence and all may have a calming of their troubled souls. May our county leaders and your people always feel the awesome presence of the power of your Holy Spirit and be guided by your holy laws. In all this we pray, and all God's people say, Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Reverend McCraney. I would, before asking for approval of the agenda, I'd just like to point out at 3:30 p.m. we had the dedication and the ribbon cutting of the Currituck County Animal Services. All of us, the commissioners were there, and we had a turnout. I will point out that I think it's of note that this is the coldest day of the year, but there was a lot of warmth and I think goodwill, and anyone who has not had an opportunity to avail themselves to look at this wonderful facility, I would ask you to consider it. And I think we can all be proud going forward of what our county has done and what our staff has been able to construct. And with that, I will ask Chair will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I'd like to take, and if we could, I apologize, under consent agenda, item 2, budget amendments, the whalehead section for further discussion at a later time.
Okay, we can do that. Who made the original? Who made
I did. With that,
with that amendment?
yes.
And second?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right, we've approved the agenda with the exclusion of item 2, budget amendment relative to the wellhead bathroom budget amendment. Okay, moving forward, we have under administrative reports, our first issue is the Senior Center Departmental Update and Report. For that, I'm going to ask Stacy Joseph, the Senior Center Coordinator, to come forward, if you will, and give us the update. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello. I'll try and keep it really short. I know Ben's looking really forward to giving his presentation. I'm going to start with a few things. I'm going to go down the agenda the way it's printed up, and then I'll get to the really good stuff. If you're not aware of Centera Living, it is programs for seniors that are offered through Centera Hospital. Currituck County is one of the first counties in North Carolina to become a part of the Hampton Roads chain, and we had our first presentation in January, and it went really well. And I just want to make you aware that we are going to have a presentation each and every month. It's advertised in their newsletter. We advertise it in our newsletters as well. February being Heart Awareness Month, we're going to kick it off at the beginning of February with a presentation on the 4th for that. And it's going to be from 10:30 to 12:30, and it's called Know Your Own Risk of Heart Disease, followed by a pocket EKG that is being offered at the end of the month for those participants. Now, I will tell you, they're doing a maximum of 40 people. It costs about $20 per person to do the pocket EKGs. So they just need to make sure they get with us and we can get that going. One of the other programs, we're going to move right along, is Walking Paws. I know you've heard a lot about the animal shelter and different programs. We have started with our seniors going every Thursday from 1 to 2 to walk a senior need friendly dog. So they're picking out dogs and making sure they're not going to yank our senior down on the ground. You can sign up for those. We're averaging 1 or 2 people that sign up each week, but it's a start. So just keep that in mind that we are doing that. I know there's other programs out there offering the same kind of walking dog services. If you have somebody that maybe can't walk a dog, they can go and play in the playroom with the animals as well. So we're working together on that. One of the new programs that you're going to see next month coming out is the Senior Buddy Program through Central Elementary. The guidance counselor there reached out to me and said she would love to have some seniors come over and read or have lunch or work with kids in the classroom. So seniors will be able to come in, they'll be able to sign up to be a buddy for a child or children over at Central Elementary, and we'll have all kinds of forms for them to do. And once we have those done, we'll get with the guidance counselor and they'll have a teacher to work with to figure out what those children need. Every volunteer will have a background check. There's no exception to that. So once that background check comes back, then we'll be happy to get that process going. I'm losing my voice. I'm sorry. It's probably going to be a little bit quicker than normal. I've got cough drops, but... Okay, annual growth and expected needs. I always do a growth of increase at the senior centers each year. I do this, and I hope I have it because there I am. I do it to see how much it's grown, not only because our facility is 2.5 times bigger than the older one, and you hear a lot of comments because people are spread out more. It's a good way to track what the growth is and where the needs are migrating. So I will tell you that the attendance at the Barco location has continued to grow up. It went up another 8% this past year. The new enrollment went up 67% with 174 people. Home delivered meals went up 31%. And this is just all for Barco. The serving meals on site went down 3%. And when you hear things like that, and you're going to hear other ones for other sites, keep in mind when you see the home delivered meals going up, that's where they're going. That's where they're transitioning to, which is not a bad thing. We're still keeping them in their homes, but there's definitely a trend in that area. Pals Point attendance went down 5%. They have an average daily of about 12 people. Knott's Island went down kind of dramatically, went down 30%. They have a daily average of 11 people. But with that being said, Knott's Island's home delivered meals went up 78%. So that shows you that those trends are moving. We're not really losing populations, they're just kind of shifting. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of those things. Okay. I'm going to give you a little bit of food for thought before we move on. Recently, I went and spoke to the Corolla Civic Association on a series of services and things that we could offer them through the senior centers. And we touched on a meeting that some of us had with the AAA on their 4-year plan. It shows, and I'm gonna read you this little excerpt here. Okay. The reason they did this meeting is because they want to find out the needs and services of the seniors so they can plan accordingly to where they need to put services and funds and so forth. And some of the things they talked about was our aging population. And we really don't think about how dramatic that's going to be, and it really is going to be very dramatic. And this is based off of a 2016 to 2020 area plan, based off a population charts from 2014 to 2034. Currituck County's total population of 2014 was 25,072. and is estimated to be 35,951 by 2034. And this is where it gets interesting. The aging community will become the majority, with Currituck County 60 plus will increase by 97.5%. 65 plus will increase by 117.5%. And 85 plus will increase by 142.3% in the next 20 years. With Currituck County having one of the highest growth in those age brackets. So the food for thought is, as you're planning, as you're approving, as you're thinking forward, please keep in mind that senior services are going to need to be the forefront of that. Yes, right. All you getting older. I am too. You're going to need services. Yes. So, when you're looking at assisted livings or daycares or whatever, you need to keep in mind that we might not have all the facilities we need right now to take care of that aging group. Okay. So I just want to make sure that you're thinking about that, because you will hear from me more as time goes on, and you'll know where it's coming from. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about SCOPE. SCOPE is a senior center operation and performance evaluation. It is a year-long process. It's grant funded. We get general purpose every year that we can apply for and receive. Every senior center in the state of North Carolina is eligible to get one share of that general purpose money. This past year, I'm not organized, as you can tell. It's terrible. This past year, we received I had it in my email. I know I sent it to you. $3,800. Thank you, Dan. $3,800 for our general purpose. Okay. Everybody that applied and received that through their grant was able to get that money. The scope evaluation tool, what it does is it goes through and it kind of says, okay, all the senior centers, they're great. They're doing what they're supposed to be, but we want you doing above and beyond. So what this process did is it puts things in place to make you go above and beyond. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about this and explain what it is. Okay. What certification is. Certification enhances a center's professionalism, provides accountability, assures quality, improves credibility, markets the organization, identifies excellence, provides a snapshot of the organization, and promotes consistency and uniform standards. Centers gain the right to describe themselves as a center of merit in their literature, grant applications, and marketing materials. So what I'm trying to say is we recently had a site team come out from Raleigh. We've been doing this process for a year, and we were awarded the Center of Merit from the state. So we will now get double the grant money that we apply for the next 5 years. So that equals up, if you were to base it off of this past year's numbers, about $19,000. The amount subjects they change based off of how many funds and how many senior centers. There is currently, I'm finding it, there's 163 centers in North Carolina, 81 being excellent, 9 being merit. I will tell you, this is some of the accommodations they gave to the senior center. There's all these different sections, whether it's publicity or assistance or advocacy and so forth. It says the center is doing a great job with general publicity of its programs, utilizing a wide variety of available publicity outlets. This is an activities, volunteers, opportunities, advocacy, transportation. The write-up in the newsletter about the senior Tar Heel legislative delegate and her role advocating for older adults was exceptional. And this was other operations. The site team found the center facility to be exceptionally attractive, modern, and well utilized. AAA site team member said, I am very happy to announce that the Currituck County Senior Center has been certified as a Center of Merit. Please join me in congratulating Stacy Joseph, Senior Center Coordinator, and staff for all their hard work. The site team found the center to be exceptionally attractive and well utilized, and was impressed with the team's passion to be the focal point of senior services for Currituck County. Well done. I can't begin to tell you how much goes into this. It's everything from staff development to advocacy. What are you smiling about? Staff development to advocacy to training outside resources. We trained the YMCA on sensitivity training. We had everybody put glasses on, and I think you might have seen that in the focus where they had to look through the glasses and see what it would be like to have different eye conditions. It's eye-opening for people that don't realize that. So it's a wonderful thing, and we're very proud. I'm very proud of my staff and how hard they worked, and I wanted to make sure that I shared that with you. And, I have to show you the award. Mike told me to make sure I showed you the award. See, there we go. I plaqued it. Okay. Anyway, it's not a great amount of money. It's more money, but it's more about going above and beyond and trying to be the best you absolutely can be to make sure people are getting the services that they need. Let's see here. Okay. We will move on from that. I know I had another cute little paragraph in there somewhere that I wanted to say about that, but I cannot find it. So we're going to talk about expansion of services. I wanted to let you know that we are expanding services in Corolla for a particular program. We're going to be utilizing the library down there as a satellite location for an 8-week Tai Chi arthritis class. They are very excited about it. I did a lot of surveys through the summer, and one of the things they wanted to do was exercise. So we decided to start out with this. Right now, we've got about 30 people signed up. It's maxed at 30. We've got an alternate list starting, so we're very excited about that. And if the turnout is well, then we'll pursue other activities throughout the year at the library. And I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that is going to be taking place. It's going to start in February, on February the 4th, on Thursdays at 2. And it has been out there and advertised for a little bit now just to get people going. So spread the word on that if you would. And they can also call the library directly at 453-0496 to sign up. With any direct questions about the programming, to call us at Barco at 232-3505. They're just assisting in signing people up. Well, one of the last things I'm going to tell you about is a change in appearance of the newsletters. Now, everybody on here that served on advisory boards for the Senior Center gets newsletters. There are 3 locations, and we have 3 newsletters. And we're gonna downsize that a little bit. We're gonna make it to where everybody is getting the same amount of information. Everybody's on the same page, and not Ben knows something and Dan doesn't know something. We're gonna make sure everybody does. You can currently have those mailed, subscribe via email, or pick them up. Some people may be having a newsletter mailed to Palace Point, from Palace Point. They may be getting Currituck. That's 2 mailings going out. It's a little too hard to track each person from the database. So you're getting two mails going to one person. That's insane. So we're going to cut back. The total pages between all 3 sites right now is about 15, and that's without any extra stuff. We're going to cut it back to about 5 or 6 once it's done. The cost of 3 separate ones, and more importantly, everybody's going to be on the same page. There's still going to be an activity calendar in there with Palace Point. There's going to be Not Silent. There's going to be Currituck. There's going to be a front cover page, and then the menu in there. So it's just going to be downsized. So when you see that changing, be prepared. It's nothing that we've been working on it for a while. We currently mail out 168, and we email 357. So we've been pushing that email. The email is actually something I started back in 2010. I kind of pushed Diane towards email when I first came, and I'm happy to see that we're up at 357, and the mail side is starting to cut down. But like I said, more importantly, everybody's going to be on the same page. You're going to know what all 3 locations is doing. You're going to know what all 3 locations are doing, so it makes it accessible, and it doesn't make people feel like I only can go to this center, and there's a lot of that, okay? And lastly, volunteers. We always need volunteers for home-delivered meals. We currently have 49 shut-ins receiving home-delivered meals. We serve out of 5 different drop-off sites or centers. So we're always in the lookout for those. We appreciate our volunteers, and they work very, very hard. And if anybody's interested in being a volunteer, they can definitely contact myself or Palace Point or Not Silent. I think that's it. I would have taught more, but I'm tired now.
You did fine. Ms. Joseph,
Yes.
if I could, on behalf of the board, I'd like to extend to you and your staff our heartfelt thanks for the hard work. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, there's several here, but of course, the one that jumps out at me, of course, is money, so that always will jump out at me. It's the doubling of the GP funds just in 1 year for an incremental 5-year span, a $19,000 increase, which is based totally on your staff's hard work and the recognition for that work. That's, I think, significant. So on behalf of the board, again, I want to extend our appreciation, and please pass that on.
I will.
Anybody
Thank
else?
you.
Stacy, I'd just like you to elaborate a little bit on the meals delivery and what the time frame that someone would need to commit to that, because a lot of folks think that if I do that, I'm going to have to do it every single day, 7 days a week. So if you could just kind of elaborate on your expectations and the hours that are involved if you're doing meals
sure.
delivery.
Meals are Monday through Friday. And, a lot of people do get caught up in thinking they have to commit to a certain time. We also take subs. Subs are very, very important for people that get sick or out on vacation. So you can do it as much as you want, or you can be a sub on the list. Time frame for meals, we don't like them to be breakfast. So we make sure you don't pick them up before 10:30, and every meal has to be delivered no later than 1 o'clock. And that's due to health and safety regulations. The problem with a lot of volunteers is they get burned out. They go and go and go. And even with staffing, it's a challenge to get staff not to call the same dependable person over and over again when somebody cancels out. So it's so important to have all those extra people on standby that we can do last minute. I know as a staff, we try to deliver once a month, and I think that's important. It's not something that was always done, but I think it's important to get out there and see the folks that you're handling with and make sure they see a face with the names. And they become more comfortable. They're more likely to tell you something if they need something. If there's a problem, they're going to pick up the phone and call you. But volunteers can do it as much or as little as they want. They can be on a sub, and it's not a big deal. If we call you and you say, no, I can't do it, we're going to move on to the next person. You're not locked into, you have to say yes that day. I do strongly recommend, though, if you put yourself down on a calendar to deliver meals, that, like anything else, you commit to it. It's so important to make sure that they get their meals on time every day. We don't want any senior going without a meal, and sometimes people last minute will not feel like doing it. And, it's not a problem if you let us know in advance, but, if you can. Sickness and things is a different story, but it's something to take serious. There's nothing really, to me, more serious than home delivered meals. So that's important.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good.
Thank you.
Stacy, thank you again
Thank
for
you.
making my time on the board
You're
very
welcome.
easy.
This is my second time talking today. This is why I'm like this. It's all Mike's fault. No.
You did well. The second item on our administrative reports is the Planning and Community Development Report, Large Structures. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Woody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have placed at each of your seats tonight a copy of this presentation. The front page is the memo, so you can follow along in the memo, or you can flip a few pages and follow the presentation. That should also be displayed on the monitor for your ability to see it. I will caution you, it is long. It has a lot of words on it, so it's not my best presentation in terms of graphic ability, but it will hopefully convey a lot of important information to the board and to the public. Before I get started, one thing I wanted to do is I want to thank the Corolla Civic Association. For those that don't know, that's a group of citizens over in the Corolla area, as well as members in the off-road area, and they were very instrumental in participating in this process. They actually came forward and helped staff not only organize the meetings, but they got the word out for us, and even made sure that local contractors and builders and developers were part of this process, which I think is important to give everybody a chance. I want to thank that group, and I also want to thank the Outer Banks Home Builders Association, as they were very active as well, and they too attended our meetings and participated in this process. So what I'm going to do is, first let me cover on November 2nd, the Board of Commissioners, after hearing a text amendment, directed staff to conduct a review of large residential structures to assess compatibility issues as well as public safety issues. You ask us to do that within 90 days. If my math is correct, today is day 90, so we're right on time. In that what we did in the past 90 days, beyond celebrate a few holidays, is we held 2 public meetings. We had our first meeting on November 20th, 2015, had our second meeting on January 8th, 2016. We also conducted a survey, which I will not claim for that is a scientifically valid survey. However, it'll give you an interesting read of just some of the basic opinions that our constituents have about this particular topic. And in your packet, if you get through the end of it, all the survey results are included for you to review. So tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to recap those survey results. I'm not going to read the survey results to you. I'm going to kind of move through them fairly quickly. We're going to go through some of the data for the Corolla and off-road area, and then we're going to talk about some strategies. These strategies are items that staff developed based on some of our research, the data, some of the public input. We shared these strategies with the public at those meetings before we came tonight. So I'll tell you that it isn't true that one of those strategies is the absolutely most correct strategy. It's just a spectrum of things that the board could use to address this issue if they decide to move forward. So let's get into the data. The first thing we did is we had a public meeting on November 20th, and at that meeting we used polling technology, which is where the staff can ask questions and the people that attend can vote right there on the spot, so you automatically see the results as you work through the meeting. That meeting was attended by a little under 30 people. Probably the majority of the folks were associated with building and development, but we certainly had citizens that participated. There was not a lot of majority responses in this information, a lot of kind of mixed responses. In terms of defining residential structures, number of bedrooms rises up to the top as perhaps the best barometer of defining what's a large structure. As the board is aware of, the challenge with number of bedrooms is according to the General Assembly, we have some limited capacity to regulate based solely on the number of bedrooms. You can see the square footage numbers there. We asked specifically what square footage constitutes a large residential structure, and 5,000 got the most votes. I guess technically still not a majority of the room, but half the room said 5,000 square feet. Talked about impacts. One of the things that the staff's had kind of a difficult time getting our arms around is what is the impact that we're trying to address. Impacts a large residential structure. Depends on if you live beside the large residential structure versus if you're a public safety first responder or if you're running the septic system or the water plant. So the impacts really vary based on your perspective. Again, we saw a really mixed bag on this. Everything got a few votes, so to speak. I'm not going to read those to you. Secondary impacts, we tried to assess if it's noise issues with these large houses, traffic generation, parking problems. They all got a similar level of votes or participation. Again, I'm not going to read those, but you can see some of the issues that. And actually, I will say that in most of these questions, we gave 4 or 5 options to respond to, and we just posted the top 3. So there are always on each question a couple that fell off the list here. So moving on. So that was our first meeting on November 20th. We felt like while we had good participation, we only had about 30 folks that did the survey at the meeting. So we created an online survey through SurveyMonkey, and we basically used the same 10 questions we did at the meeting. The challenge with the SurveyMonkey, full disclosure, is you had to pick one. A lot of folks wanted the ability to pick multiple things. If I say what's an issue with large houses, they may have 2 or 3 things they want to vote on. You could only choose one, so that does limit these results a little bit. But you can see in this particular pool, we had mostly non-resident property owners, which was good because a lot of times we have a hard time getting that group of people, getting their opinions and getting them to participate in these processes. And also had a lot of residents that filled out the survey as well. On this one, you can see, again, the number of bedrooms by far continues to be probably the strongest indicator of what folks associate with a large residential structure. Comes back to 8. We see 8. 8 is the magic number for whatever reason. People seem to think when you're more than 8 bedrooms, you move into the arena of being a large residential structure. Same thing with square footage. Not a majority, but 5,000 square feet seems to get the most leverage in terms of what trips people's idea of what a large residential structure is. Interesting on this, we've asked a lot of the questions. Is a concern with these large structures, the compatibility with the neighbors, and that's the idea that you may have a 10,000 square foot house that's beside a 2,000 square foot house, or is it just the overall scale and bulk? And so you see that kind of mixed pretty evenly in this survey as to what the issue was. A lot of concern with parking setbacks, light pollution. A little surprising on the online survey, we saw a lot of concern with water and sewer overusage. So a lot of folks are tuned in to either the utilities that the county provides or Carolina Water provides, or in a lot of instances, folks are on on-site septic systems. So certainly septic systems are rated for a certain capacity, so there can be issues with water and sewer usage. Most concerning secondary impact is traffic. That tends to be the case a lot of times in land use issues.
Mr. Woody,
Yes, sir.
when we're talking traffic, are we talking about traffic within the area where the house is built, or or overall traffic in the Highway 12?
Yeah, and the challenge with the online survey is I couldn't figure out what people meant when they answered that as the biggest problem. During the public meetings, we discussed traffic in the neighborhood level. So the idea of when you have an event at a big house, the traffic that comes in and out for that event, or just the fact it's a 24-bedroom house and a lot of people come and go. So our context in the public meetings was more at a neighborhood scale. There's not much we can do with NC-12.
That's what I would suspect, too. I was just curious.
Yeah. So the summary is, and this is probably what you're really looking for, is we think based on the public input that large residential structures is best defined by bedrooms, but as I mentioned earlier, that's difficult because we have some limited ability to regulate the number of bedrooms if the board decided to do that. It appears that usually more than 5,000 square feet is a square footage or bulk that's associated with a large residential structure based on public input. Had some comments about compatibility, which is having a large structure beside a smaller one. Use of property, that's the idea of these structures being used regularly for special events or other temporary gatherings. Then, of course, you saw scattered throughout the public input concerns with water, sewer, public safety, traffic, parking, noise, etc. So I think that gathering the public input didn't really tell us anything we didn't know coming into it. It probably rather confirmed some of the assumptions we had made. So the next step that the staff did was just kind of look at the hard data. And this data is based on tax records. So we were able to pull from the tax office the effective area or square footage of structures in Corolla and the off-road area, as well as the number of bedrooms. That tax data was pulled from 1900 all the way up to August of 2015. So it, for the most part, includes probably most of the houses that exist today in the Outer Banks area. And what you can see, and we broke it up by Corolla and off-road area. In Corolla, there's 3,905 residential structures. The average number of bedrooms is 5. I'm not going to read all this to you. Our largest house at the time of this data had 28 bedrooms in the Corolla area. Houses with 8 or more bedrooms was 323, which is 8.3% of the housing stock. Houses with more than 5,000 square feet was 261, which is about 6.7% of the existing housing stock in Corolla. And of course, you can see there were 6 houses that had more than 10,000 square feet. And I'll let you look at that for a second. One thing I'll point out is you can see that the average square foot of houses in all of the paved road area was 2,900 square feet, so about 3,000 square foot is your average size. I'll note that in the years, let me find it, 2005 to 2015, the average square foot of houses built during that time was 3,800 square feet. So you can certainly see that in the past decade, our house size is increasing. During the meeting, somebody made a good point. They said, well, why didn't you do the median? What if your numbers are being skewed by these outliers on either side of the mean? We actually went back and ran the median, and the median numbers were almost identical to the mean. So they were they were very similar. So we didn't include the median in this particular chart, but I will tell you we did verify that the median did basically match the mean, which the median being the middle point of the data, the mean being the average. So if we move to the off-road area, 741 total structures are there. Mean number of bedrooms is 3.9, so the housing stock is a little smaller in the off-road area. Maximum number of bedrooms at the time of this data was 23. Again, mean square foot of houses in the off-road area was 2,200. Mean square foot of houses from 2005 to 15 was 2,600. So the houses are also getting bigger in the off-road area, but perhaps by not as much as in the paved road area. Typical square footage of 8-bedroom house is 5,500. Houses with 8 or more bedrooms was 47, which is 6.3% of the housing stock. And then houses with square footages that exceed 5,000 was 27, which is 3.6% of the housing stock. So you can see that the larger houses in the off-road area are a slightly smaller percentage than those in the paved road area. And that information is in your packet as well. Noise permits. One thing we thought would be interesting was to try to figure out if there's any correlation between large houses and noise permits. Now, I want to give one caveat to this data. These are the houses that follow the rules. So these are the ones that actually get the noise permits. It doesn't mean that there aren't big houses or small houses that have events that are not getting noise permits. But as you can see, county issued 104 total noise permits from 2010 to 2015. Of those, 14 were commercial, so we discount those. So there were 90 residential permits that were issued during that time period, and I will tell you that about 73% of the noise permits were issued to houses that were greater than 5,000 square feet, and then about 77% of the noise permits were issued to houses that were more than 8 bedrooms. So I don't know if that means that the majority of houses that need noise permits are large houses. There's probably some truth to that. Or perhaps the majority of houses that follow the rules and get noise permits are big houses. So there was some limitation in that data set. But it's still interesting to see that most of your regular users of the noise permits are, in fact, the larger houses.
Mr. Woody,
Yes, sir.
is there any limit on the number of noise permits a house can get per year?
I'm not aware of a limit.
I
no.
mean, so if I'm living next door to a home and they rent it for events every year, they can have a band every weekend or whatever and just get a noise permit?
That's correct. To the best of my knowledge, and I'll ask maybe the county attorney can verify that. And what I think the noise permit essentially does, it allows you to have a higher decibel level, and I believe it allows you to operate to a later hour in the night as well.
So in my neighborhood, if I decide on Saturday nights I just want to play my music loud, I just get a noise permit, and then, neighbors have no say in it because I got a noise permit?
I believe that's my understanding. That's correct. I'm gonna keep moving, and if the attorney has some insight beyond what I gave, he can add it. So,
All right, thank you.
I don't need to summarize this, but I will do it because that's what we're here for. So the tax and permit data indicate that overall the house size has increased. It is increasing. The number of bedrooms is increasing. I also note that houses that exceed 5,000 square feet or that exceed 8 bedrooms still represent a relatively small percentage of the total housing stock. Most houses, and I just covered this, most houses that are applying for noise permits tend to be the larger houses. That's just some of the real obvious observations from those data that we shared.
So, Mr. Woody, when you indicated the numbers of noise permits, that was indicative for all noise permits.
That's all the noise permits the county issued
in
the Outer Banks,
Outer Banks
yes.
area.
Yes.
So, in other words, there was no noise permits asked for a 2,500 square foot house.
Oh, excuse me. There were other residential properties. 36 noise permits that were issued for properties that were not on this list.
That was my question.
Yeah. However, of the total range of data, of the 90 residential noise permits that were issued, basically more than 70% of those were for houses that were either bigger than 5,000 square feet or more than 8 bedrooms. So still the vast majority of them are for larger houses.
Okay.
Yes.
But there was still a
20-something% were smaller.
a lower number of permits that were asked for by smaller residents.
Correct. And those could have been as small as 2,000 square feet.
I have a question. This is probably more properly directed to the county attorney. Commissioner O'Neill brings up a good point relative to the noise permit issue. That obviously we'll need to look at that in the future. But my question is this. How does the noise permit how is it juxtaposed against our county police enforcement statute relative to, because our noise ordinance is kind of a two-prong. It's one, there's a decibel level, but two, there is a nuisance also portion of that, which is subjective. But does the noise permit preclude any address of our existing noise ordinance that speaks to the public nuisance? In other words, if a deputy gets a call from neighbors and the deputy drives up and in his opinion it's more than just noise, I mean it's a nuisance level, is he precluded from any activity or any action? I mean, I don't know. Where's the cutoff? I mean, when you get a noise permit, is that open-ended? You can make all the noise you want.
No, what you're getting, first of all, you're getting a permit that allows you to have amplified sound and allows you to exceed a decibel level that's in one of the tables within the ordinance up to a certain maximum amount during certain periods of time during the day and depending on the use of the property. I would also note it appears that there is perhaps some limitation on the number of permits that can be issued to a particular piece of property. First of all, the sheriff has some broad discretion to consider a certain number of factors which are delineated within the ordinance, but does not limit the sheriff to considering other factors. But one of the factors is the numbers of permits that have been previously issued at that particular location. The sheriff may also consider the number of permits that are being issued within a 1,000-foot radius of each other. In considering or acting upon a request for a permit to exceed requested by a group, the sheriff or appointed designee shall limit permits granted at any specific location to no more than 2 permits to exceed per year. But I think maybe I will have some further conversation with the Sheriff's Department to determine how it is that this ordinance is being applied and how it is that they are issuing permits to exceed the decibel level.
So I guess my question is, does the noise permit preclude the applicability of our noise ordinance? You've answered the first part of it saying there is a decibel level above which it cannot transcend.
That's correct.
How does that juxtapose with the nuisance part of it, which is the second prong of our ordinance? We have a two-prong ordinance dealing with our noise ordinance.
Well,
two levels, two subjective, well, one not subjective, but one subjective.
Well, first of all, if someone asks for a permit to exceed, that would allow them to go from what is normally allowed of 60 decibels, for example, in a residential area between the hours of 7 o'clock a.m. and 9 o'clock p.m., up to a decibel level of 80 between 5 p.m. and 11 p.m. on Friday, 10 a.m. to 11 p.m. on a Saturday, and a similar type of provision for a holiday. But that does not negate the subjective portion of the ordinance, also called the reasonable person standard, that would allow for someone to seek the issuance of a criminal summons if the noise, despite it meeting the decibel levels, is still not allowing them to have reasonable use of their property in peace and quiet or due to the noise coming from the adjacent property. So someone could conceivably still go forward with a reasonable person standard, the subjective standard, despite the fact that objectively the permittee is meeting the decibel level under the permit to exceed.
Okay. Thank you, but I would just note that maybe we should look at that. I mean, that's could be problematic going forward unless we.
I think one of the issues is the court system does not want to be bothered with noise complaints, and I don't know that we have a very good success record of any prosecution of noise complaints, do we?
Now, my understanding is there's at least perhaps one district court judge that regularly dismisses the noise ordinance violations or criminal summons issued under the subjective reasonable person standard under the belief that it is unconstitutional. It's not. Our ordinance reads exactly like an ordinance that was found to be constitutional by the North Carolina Court of Appeals some years ago. But nevertheless, that's what occurs, I understand, in district court. I also know in this judicial district in the past, some district court judges have said, some things don't rise to the level of a criminal offense and should be handled perhaps civilly, in particular zoning type of issues, not necessarily noise, but zoning issues.
And to Commissioner O'Neill's point, and then we can move on. I'll just note, and I pointed out that we have a two-prong, and that subjective portion of our noise ordinance, not only in this jurisdiction, but others have been, or it's been successfully challenged based on the subjectivity of it.
Well, I mean, again, there is a Court of Appeals decision that would stand for the proposition that our ordinance and similarly drafted subjective portions of noise ordinances are constitutional and valid. And what is key is that a person who is proceeding under the reasonable person standards is going to have to be able to establish to the satisfaction of the court that they are, first of all, a reasonable person, whatever that might mean to a presiding judge.
Thank you.
Mr. McCree, just to help me understand something, with the noise permit now, has the amplified noise, does it have to be inside of a building or can it be outside? In other words, I've got a 10,000 square foot house. I'm gonna have a party. Does that amplified noise? Has it got to be interior, or can I have that noise out on the porch on the deck?
I don't recall that it's specific, but as whether it has to be maintained inside of a structure or outside. The bottom line is it cannot exceed that allowed decibel level, the 80 decibels that I used in the example. Now, that decibel reading is to be taken from the property line of the complainant. That ordinance was amended back in about 2007, 2008.
So it doesn't matter if it's inside or outside.
That's
it's
right.
What is registered at the property line.
Property line of the complainant, not the
Right.
property line
Understood.
of the permit holder.
I'm trying to understand how.
And where that gets interesting is that if the complainant lives a block away, that may not, whereas what would be considered to be a nuisance at the next door neighbor's property line may not be at, a block away. And in a highly transient type neighborhood, unless the individual in the house beside is aware of our ordinance with that, tracking the obeyance of that ordinance is going to be very difficult to try and track.
I'm just trying to understand where size plays a place in this. I know when we had a work session, I said then, and I still believe now, use is the big issue. Use is the issue. I mean, I asked Mr. Woody about permits at smaller houses. Hell, I can get a permit for a 1,000 square foot house to have amplified noise. I assume I could.
Certainly.
So you still have the same issue, the same problem. I have my issues with big houses, no doubt. I mean, y'all have heard me with fire protection and life safety and public safety. Certainly have issues with them, but I'm just trying to hone in on what we're trying to get to, and everything that I keep hearing, it revolves around the things that take place that bother the neighbors, which is the use. Now, I don't know how we fix that, but I mean, it seems to me like there is the deal, and maybe the close proximity, the light coverage, and the setbacks, and all that. There's a lot of good stuff in here, a lot of great stuff in here, as I've read through it, I think. But I'm still trying to get my arms around the
It may
root.
well be the impact that comes from these large structures, and like
Exactly.
you say, the type of use that's being made of them, not the structures in and of themselves.
But in essence, you could have the same impact from a smaller house that
Certainly.
was. I guess that's what I keep
Yeah,
going back to.
I can tell you where I live, on occasion, a car will go by my house and the windows start rattling and the pictures on the side of the wall And that's not a big structure. It's the noise. It's the use is what bothers you. And a lot of times, even though that boom, boom, boom noise or whatever will never register 80 decibels or whatever the ordinance is, but it's bothersome just to sit there and hear it just constantly over and over, even though it's not violating the noise ordinance. So the use is a big part of it, and annoying the neighbors, which totally sympathetic with that.
Thank you.
So, and to move past, I'll add one more thing, is during that same time period from 2010 to 2015, there were also more than 800 noise complaints received by the sheriff's office. The problem is those are difficult to map because a lot of times when the complaint comes in, the person that calls doesn't know their address, certainly doesn't know the address of where they're complaining at. So the data is somewhat unreliable. Because what we would like to do if we could figure this out is somehow maybe try to find out if there's concentrations of complaints. So if the complaints tend to be in certain subdivisions or certain areas of subdivisions, but we just haven't been able to map that yet. So that would probably be the next step in trying to understand, like, are these complaints, they're coming from certain types of situations, or is there something we can glean from that information? But it's just difficult to map at this point. But I'm going to keep moving on past that. So that brought us to, after looking at the data, is the public input is what is a large residential structure? Like, how do you define it? And I think that's in Commissioner Idle, we've come at it from structure because that's something that we can quantify. The use is more difficult to quantify, although I would say, and I say this anecdotally, I do think there's some relation or some correlation between use and large structure, because there's a point when the number of bedrooms or these structures are probably no longer second homes and probably become more of investment properties. So I do think there's a relationship that remains between structure size and use of the structure, but there's certainly exceptions to that.
Don't disagree with you whatsoever. I agree with you.
And I think when you ask yourself as a board, what is a large residential structure, or even as individuals, that answer probably also depends on, is that your second home, is that your retirement home, or is that an investment property? And you can ask owners of these properties, and they usually will tell you one of the two. So that probably also comes into play into how you answer what a large residential structure is. But what the staff has proposed to this point is using 5,000 square feet as a marker, because we think on the data that 5,000 square feet is roughly equivalent to 8 bedrooms. Typically a 5,000 square foot house has about 8 bedrooms on average. We think bedrooms is probably what most folks would like to use as the measure, but given the current regulatory environment in the state, we really can't use bedrooms as a way to regulate or create regulations if the board decides to move forward with that. 8 bedrooms typically has an occupancy of about 16 people, which is in the building code. If you look in commercial settings in the building code, 16 people tends to link to different types of standards. If you have a use that has an occupancy of greater than 16, it tends to fall into a higher level of scrutiny under the building code. So there's some basis for using 16 as a number for when things perhaps are more of an assembly type setting. 5,000 square feet is a number that CAMA uses. The Division of Coastal Management has said that 5,000 square feet is a structure that can reasonably be moved. So in terms of applying oceanfront setbacks, they use 5,000 square feet as a structure size that can meet the smallest setback that's required by CAMA. So again, there's a context for that number in the Division of Coastal Management rules. And then just generally the public input seemed to favor 5,000 square feet or something similar to 8 bedrooms. So we, for purposes of tonight, have used 5,000 square feet as our marker for large residential structure. I'll take you back to some of the data. Combined, that's probably less than 6% of the housing stock in the county currently. So that gives you to the options, to the strategies that this board can consider in moving forward if you decide to address any impacts of large residential structures. We came up with 5 basic options. I'm going to go over those, but before I do that, I want you to see all 5 of them. You don't have to choose one. You don't have to choose any. You can choose parts or pieces of these if you'd like to. These are all address different concerns. I would say that number 1 and number 2, which are more geared towards dimensional requirements, bulk of the house, those are probably going to be more effective in addressing scale and bulk. There are going to be things that control just the size of the house. When you get down to number 3, which are requirements related to noise and parking, solid waste, number 4 even having some sort of permit requirement. 3 and 4 are the things that are probably more effective at addressing use. Those go more at what are the things that are happening from these events or these big structures. And number 5 is something that we probably should do regardless, which is try to educate people more about our noise ordinance and public safety access and all the issues that we deal with as a county, and making sure the owners and the realty companies are aware of those as well. So any questions on those 5? I'm going to walk through those. You can stop me during each one individually, or at the end of it you can ask questions.
Talk a little bit about secondary impacts. What do you?
Secondary impacts we've identified as things that aren't always readily identifiable. So secondary impacts would be noise. They would be traffic, parking, solid waste, water and sewer, things that are a result of people, not necessarily the result of the built house, but the people that use the house. Strategy number 1, and probably the absolute most straightforward strategy on this list, is to require that any 1 or 2 family dwelling over 5,000 square feet be zoned commercial. That is essentially taking these large structures and moving them to areas of the county that are currently zoned commercial, or would require an owner to rezone their property to commercial. Now, I'll readily admit the likelihood of getting a commercial zoning approved in the middle of a residential subdivision is probably slim to none. This strategy probably most resembles the text amendment request you saw previously, in that it doesn't address events necessarily. It just tackles the large structures based on size, and really what it does is limits the geographical area available to those large structures. Now, what I'll note as an alternative and something else, well, one thing I want to say is that just because the Board of Commissioners says that if a structure is larger than 5,000 square feet, it's got to be zoned commercial, I don't know that necessarily means that it has to meet the commercial building code. And Ike and I discussed that, the attorney and I discussed that some today, and that probably warrants further discussion if the board thinks this is a viable option. But in that discussion, we also, doing a little more research, realized that while zoning probably doesn't have the ability to require life safety features such as a sprinkler system, there appears to be some precedent that local governments have went to the General Assembly and sought local acts to have the ability to require fire safety, fire code related life safety features in residential construction. So as you consider this option, number one is just to create a prohibition and move larger structures to commercially zoned areas. The alternative is to seek perhaps a local act to allow the county to require some sort of life safety features for large structures.
Generally, most PUDs, do they not have some commercial areas in them?
They do. Every PUD has a commercial node, and 10% of the land area of every PUD is allowed to be used for commercial purposes. I'm going to keep moving if there's no comments on that. And it may be helpful just to see everything before you have final comments. Strategy number 2 is getting away from having a prohibition on a number or moving uses to commercial areas, and it's more of a focus on dimensional and development standards. So this is the strategy of you allow big houses, but at 5,000 square feet, you begin to look at them a little bit differently. One is increasing the parking. I think we're under parking these large residential structures, and if we do nothing else, we need to increase the parking requirements for these houses. The other thought is to increase setbacks, and that's not just setbacks for the principal structure, but I would argue even accessory structures, accessory use areas, outdoor gathering areas. So, for example, if your house exceeded 5,000 square foot, then your house and your pool and your pool cabana and your stage you set out for activities is all going to be 20 feet from the adjoining property line. You could even begin to look at building separation. So again, if you build a house that exceeds 5,000 square feet, you then require what's called a 40-foot or a building separation, which would mean that when you built your large house, you would have to maintain, in this example, a 40-foot separation from the adjoining houses. What that does is that probably limits the spread of a fire to adjoining houses and gives the public safety first responders a little more opportunity to fight the fire, hopefully. And the one thing, and I don't have that number needs to be researched a little more, but obviously the bigger the house, the more wood that's used to frame and build the house, and the more wood you have, the more intense the fire becomes.
Let's face it. 10 foot. What do we have? 10-foot setbacks now.
10 foot now, and no building separation.
You double it to 20 foot. Really, what have we done? I don't know. Is that any impact?
I think
adding 10 additional feet, but in the big scheme of things, when you're talking about noise and talking about being bothersome from neighbor to neighbor, well, is that additional 10 foot? Is that
A distinction without a difference.
yeah?
Yeah. Again, these are probably more strategies. 1 and 2, they're going to get it bulk. So if you're living in a 3,000 square foot house, you'd probably rather have the 8,000 square foot house 40 feet from you than you would 20. So it just gives you a little bit of relief from bulk for sure. But you could also do things like requiring screening for these outdoor spaces and accessory uses. Another thing we talked about was wetlands and areas that are seaward of the crest of the frontal dune be removed from the calculations for lot coverage. And that would mostly affect oceanfront lots, but there are also sound side and interior lots that have wetlands. What that does is, in terms of creating lot coverage, it would require the property owner to take advantage of the actual usable areas of the lot versus areas that really have probably no bearing on the lot coverage or the bulk or density of the house. And the last thing that probably warrants some discussion if you begin to do this, and maybe this gets more at the large house in the existing platted neighborhood, but is create some sort of sliding scale. You could have a scale where the larger the house gets, the larger the lot area gets. We know that in Corolla, houses that are greater than 5,000 square feet, the average lot size is 0.64 acres. I think I don't have my math, I don't calculate, but it's about 28 or 29,000 square foot. So those are typically the lot sizes you see on the ocean front. Maybe some interior lots in subdivisions like Ocean Hill 1 and Wellhead, but primarily probably oceanfront lots. And then in the off-road area, for houses that are greater than 5,000 square feet, the average lot size is 2.2 acres. So up there, the bigger houses you tend to see on bigger lots. Little example, here's a couple of houses, I believe in either Ocean Hill 1 or the Wellhead subdivision. And this is a lot to see on this screen, but essentially what happens if you apply some of these increased setbacks, you increase the parking requirement, you take the area seaward of the crest of the dune out of the lot coverage, what you do is you essentially narrow the building envelope of these houses. Each of these houses could still have, these were 5,000 square foot houses. Actually, one is 6,000. One is a 6,000 square foot house. One is a 7,800 square foot house, actually. So they're very large houses. Under these dimensional standards that staff just reviewed, they both could still be built. The difference is they would each need stormwater plans because at this point they would exceed the maximum lot coverage. In the county, we do allow residential lots to exceed lot coverage provided you do a stormwater management plan. The one downside I would say when you narrow the building envelope as we've done on this, you may have the unintended effect of creating kind of shotgun style 8,000 square foot houses, which is a problem that Kill Devil Hills struggles with, and I'm not sure that's the intended effect, but this just kind of shows you that shrinking the building envelope without increasing the lot size doesn't necessarily prohibit these houses. It just pushes them away from the neighbors and probably gets more parking and more stormwater management in place. Any other questions on strategy 2? Number 3, strategy 3, and this is where we get into, I think, things that probably have more impact on the use. And I would say that in this particular case, you would probably apply these types of requirements not only to houses that exceed 5,000 square feet, but I would begin to argue even properties that are designed, maintained, or advertised to host special events or temporary gatherings. So maybe this is the opportunity you start to apply some standards, not just based on square footage, but based on use. Things that we would typically see is obviously looking at the noise ordinance. You had a lot of discussion on that tonight. Something that, readily to me is limiting the number of permits, which may already be the case, but also perhaps reducing the hours from amplified sound from 11 to 9. Looking at the settings or criteria in which you can have those amplified sound permits. Lighting came up some. We have full cutoff fixtures that we require for commercial facilities, and that's the idea of shielding light and making sure that floodlights and things aren't pointing at your neighbor's house all night long. Solid waste, there's instances where it appears that the solid waste ordinance isn't met over there, but probably one way to manage not having 24 rollout containers out by the road twice a week is perhaps to have larger waste receptacles, but then the downside to that is I'm not sure we want to put dumpsters in residential neighborhoods, so there probably needs to be some thought about solid waste and kind of how you manage that from these larger houses. And maybe that requires that the owners of the house do a better job of managing their solid waste flow. Traffic and on-street parking, just obviously more ticketing of that is one thing. Probably making sure that all the streets in the neighborhoods have prohibited on-street parking. For it to be prohibited, it's got to be included in the code of ordinances. Perhaps better signage, not a lot, but some better signage in neighborhoods about on-street parking. And then finally, in terms of secondary impacts, is maintaining public safety access, just looking at how the first responders get to these large houses. Very, very similar idea, and this comes really from the example that I came across was the town of Duck. The town of Duck actually requires a license or a permit to have special events. It's voluntary, so it's not a required thing. So I don't know if they have any teeth behind it, but they've really pushed this program out. And what they're doing is they're saying any event or any house that has an event that exceeds 50 attendees, they must submit a parking plan, obtain a noise permit, provide a solid waste plan. The town's able to verify septic, sewer capacity, and then public safety notification is provided so the first responders understand that there is some sort of event happening at this property. Now, what you could consider in terms of managing this is you could have a voluntary program or you could have a mandatory program. Through a mandatory program, you could have each event house licensed for the season, and you could even cap the number of events or the parameters in which the events occur. So that would be another option for dealing with the use of these houses.
How would we enforce that? We would have event police?
You'd have to have staff to do that. So if this is something the board wants to do, there has to be analysis on the extent to which planning or law enforcement can do that, and that may require additional staff. Again, these are just options at this point.
Woody, I have a question. Do we have the capacity to put a maximum number of occupants per house? I do know that at one time several years ago, it may be Corolla Light, that they enforce the maximum number of occupants per house. So if you have a 5-bedroom house, then maybe your maximum capacity is 15, or I don't know what the number is. But is there anything that allows that to happen? Because you're talking about 50 attendees in a house. That's a whole lot of people in a house. Even in a 15-bedroom house, that's a whole lot of people in a house. And certainly that goes back to the fire safety issue and safety in general. You see these decks collapsing where they have so many people on them and people getting hurt and killed. And if you had a fire in one of these houses with 50, 60, 75 attendees, which is way over capacity, is there anything that allows that to be looked at?
Yeah, the General Assembly does allow local governments to develop regulations based on the occupancy of a structure. Now, what I would tell you is, in terms of administering or enforcing that type of ordinance, my opinion is it's probably more difficult or more staff intensive to do it on an event-by-event basis. I think that setting it up as some sort of license or some sort of county permit at the beginning of the season for all the events, all the parties understand what the rules are, is probably a more effective way to do it. But either one of those ways, either having a license to affect or to limit occupancy, or doing it on a case-by-case basis would be, I think, allowable for the county to do.
Mr. Woody, the General Assembly will allow that to happen for residential structures to set occupancy loading?
You can set occupancies for residential structures.
For residential structures?
Yes.
News to me.
That's on you. I mean,
The commercial component, you can, certainly, and that was where I was going a while ago when we were talking about it. I'm sorry, Mr. Craig.
Now,
It's
what
fine. It's
I want to clarify, that's, in terms of when a plan comes in, if Southern Shores, for example, has a maximum occupancy of 16, and we know that under wastewater rules, a bedroom is provided 2 people per bedroom. I mean, you can do the math, and you can get houses built that basically have 7 or 8 bedrooms, whatever it is. Now I have to ask the county attorney this in terms of if I had a wedding at my house, and for that one time I had guests arrive, I'm not sure the county would go in there and be able to shut down the wedding. So I think it's more of a function of the construction of the house and probably the intended and normal use of the house.
Generally, occupancy is related to a room, and the number of occupants that can be, just like this room here. There's an occupancy loading for this room as a commercial structure.
96.
Whatever it is, 96 or
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, you're not going to get an occupancy loading for the entire courthouse. They're going to come in and set it aside as public assembly areas and break it down from there. But
The struggle is, and I think you've addressed on it, and I think Commissioner O'Neill, you did as well, and Commissioner Griggs, is how do you, I mean, we can have all the statutes we want, but the reality is, how are you going to enforce this? I mean,
Bingo.
you're not going to be able to issue tags for every resident in a house and then do a tag check. We are at risk at an ordinance that is unenforceable.
That's
so,
right. Or faced with hiring a bunch of people and
You're
then
still
we're
not gonna
increasing government.
who's hiding under the couch? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and to follow up on a point Commissioner O'Neill made, and I think it's intertwined. This question is not separate. These issues aren't separate. They're intertwined. His example of a deck collapsing, I think that's indicative or reflective of a different standard of building in a residential structure as opposed to a commercial structure that has significant higher weight-bearing requirements. So the public safety can, in fact, piggyback or be part of the question of public safety. But there's 2 different building standards, and decks collapsing are not rare. I mean, I'm not talking about around here. They've got them in Myrtle Beach. They've got them in, and it's an issue that while we're looking at this, we need to look at the whole. And
It's also not limited to residential. I mean, they have decks that collapse that are built to commercial standards as well.
Yeah, that wear, and you don't have the inspection on the bolts.
Right, and it goes back to what is the purpose and what is the plan. And, I mean, engineering designs are to a reasonable excess of plan loading. And what you're seeing is in a lot of those it's way above what was anticipated as normal use.
well, then that takes us right back to occupancy and how do we control it? So, anyhow.
Yeah, I think.
We find ourselves back at the beginning.
Well, I mean, that's why options like number 1 and number 2 that are quantifiable are much easier to administer because it's something that the staff will do at plan review. It's basically part of the building permit review. When you get into strategies 3 and 4, you start to get more into the things that are happening after the structure is built, which is doable, but it's very difficult to do that on a case by case basis when there's, as we just said, there's 5,000 housing units on the Outer Banks, and the great majority of those are probably, vacation rentals.
And would it not be fair to state that without a complaint-driven call, we're not going to, I mean, you're not going to go door to door, and unless somebody complains of, hey, I think there's too many people next door, we'll never be able to enforce what's going on.
Yeah, I think without a license or a permit or something like that, it's very difficult to enforce, these types of kind of secondary impacts for these events. Now, it can be done. It's just we've got to commit to the way in which we do it. Last thing I'll note that's somewhat related to that is, and I think this is, again, an easy thing to move forward with at this point, is try to do a better job with just education outreach. And that's making sure the wedding planners and the realty companies and the county tourism are all on the same page. And when we're messaging the vacation destination, we're making sure it includes things that are important, such as ordinances, but not just that. The idea that decks can collapse, or whatever information we want to convey. If that were unified and consistent messaging, I think that would hopefully be helpful to an extent. So maybe the users or renters, the back end users of these properties, would be a little more informed about what they can and can't, or should and shouldn't do with the property. So education was our fifth strategy. So that's the five that we kind of developed, and they're very broad in their scope. And again, you could do one, none, or pieces of those. Staff would recommend at this point, at a minimum, that we look at the parking requirements. I feel relatively comfortable saying that 5,000 square feet is a reasonable number to use for identifying a large residential structure. I think setbacks and building protection, maybe some compatibility standards, some of that is in the realm of possibility. Again, all those things are quantifiable. Education we certainly should do. And if we don't do the license or permit, if that's not an option, then staff would say at least consider some sort of event registration, or somehow we're getting these people to let our public safety officials know when and where events are happening. What we would ask the board to do at this point is give some of this information consideration. You just received this tonight, so I'm not sure you're prepared to make any decision tonight. But we would like, before moving forward and getting more into the details of this, what staff would ask for some direction on where the board's at in terms of managing these large residential structures.
Question. Mr. Chairman, I have one question. Mr. Woody, I know at one point in time when we were talking about this in the beginning, there was some concern about, I think we all agree that we seem to have a different clientele that's visiting our beaches each and every year. And it seems like the complaints and the rowdiness or whatever seems to be getting a little stronger each year. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from folks. At one point we were talking about, is there any correlation between larger houses, more people, and the behavior that we're seeing in some of the patterns and this taking place, the abuse of alcohol, the whatever, that's just all the different issues that are taking place. Did you find any evidence or did you look into any of that, or is that something that was beyond the scope?
It's something that we still need to do. We've had some conversation with the sheriff's office about getting that data, the criminal data, but I'm not in a position to comment tonight because that needs to be mapped and then correlated with some of this information. So that certainly is another step that we need to do. We focus mostly on just the structure and its immediate impacts in terms of planning and zoning issues, but the staff can compile that information related to crime.
I kind of thought maybe that was one of the things that we were going to do. I don't know. Maybe I'm just out there in left field as I am usually. But
Well, I think one of the things, Mr. Idlett, is I think we're seeing a large uptick of weddings on the Outer Banks. And typically wedding parties, people get married when they're young. They have a tendency to be larger crowds, and they have a tendency to stay up a little later than some of us guys and gals. And I think the uptick in weddings is probably going to have an uptick in these use of these houses. And then I know of a couple of instances this past summer where parents just rented a cottage and turned their high school students loose on it.
Yeah.
And bought them all the alcohol they could drink and just turned them loose.
Yeah.
And so you've got some things, and I think that information you're asking for is going to show a lot if staff has time to pull it together.
Well, it may show some trends as to even how, and I'm getting a little bit off point, but I think it's important as we talk about this. It may show how there's been some changes made in how realtors do business and how they rent places. So I hear. I mean, that's what I'm being told. And it's making it easier for some of the things like you're talking about that to happen and to take place. Well, and so maybe as in it's number 5, the education outreach, realty companies as part of that. Maybe that's something we need to look at it as well as we move forward. I mean, there's no easy answer. There's no one simple answer up there that's going to solve the problem. I don't think it's going to take a coalition of different things that may or may not work, and some trial and error maybe. I don't know.
Just to follow up, in some of the discussions that I've had, it appears that the profitable economic model going forward for construction in the area in which we're talking about has shifted significantly over or recently. In the past, you've seen more investment houses for retirement, 2, 3, 4 bedrooms. I think that corresponds with your statistics showing the average size. I've been told now that matrix, that economic model, is no longer as attractive as it had been, let's say, last decade or before, has now shifted to where the concentration is more for these larger houses that will sustain the economic ability for these events that make them profitable. So, regardless of what we decide, we're going to have to decide it, because the pressure now, or the movement, is towards building those larger houses. I think the statistics you have there are good now. I think 5 or 10 years from now, you'll see a significant increase or shift towards these larger houses, because I'm being told by those who know that that's where we're heading. Any other questions? Any observations? So for tonight, what we're looking at, this is more informative, and staff is asking that the board, I would suggest, on advice and consent from my fellow commissioners, that we maybe establish a workshop, or we're going to have to come together. There's a multiplicity of issues here that they're all intertwined that we're just going to have to work out.
I tend to agree with that, and so I would ask, is this something that we've got the retreat coming up before our next meeting, correct?
We certainly can add this to the agenda and continue the conversation at your retreat.
Okay, but the retreat's before our next meeting, right?
Yes, sir.
Let's add this to the retreat agenda and see if we can sit down and make some sense of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All righty. Without any other comments or question, I guess I'll just summarize, quoting those two, Laurel and Hardy, and this will be directed at Ben. This is a fine mess you got us into this time. And with that, I'll move on to, unless there's any other comments, seeing none, I'll move on to public hearings. Our first public hearing is public hearing in action on PB 15-17. It's Currituck County. Request to amend multiple sections of the Unified Development Ordinance to modify residential development standards. With that, I will open the public hearing, and I once again will direct this to Mr. Woody.
And this is, as to steal from your quote, this is a fine mess I just got our senior planner, Donna Volova, into. Because she is going to present to you tonight. I'm sure you've probably grown tired of my commentary on large residential structure. So Donna is here tonight on this topic. In all seriousness, we started this in January of last year, actually, so it's been a year coming to get to this point. Donna's been before this board multiple times over the past 12 months in work sessions. We've stopped in to get direction from the Board of Commissioners on several topics. We've done some polling and interactive exercises among the board as well. So we feel like tonight we've been able to capture what the board's looking to see in terms of some UDO text amendments. The focus of this is on residential development on the mainland, with really a focus on lot design, density, lot size, those types of issues. So Donna's going to go through this in great detail, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Donna, Mr. Chairman, could I make one comment
Certainly.
previous to
Sure.
what we just talked about? I see there's a bunch of people here from the Outer Banks tonight. Thank you all for coming, number one. Number two, we're going to work on this in the retreat some. I want to talk to each and every one of you. Please call me, or if I don't know who you are, some of you I know, some I'm not sure. Please call me. I certainly need your advice and your help with this as we move this thing forward. And I look forward to talking to each and every one of you. I don't know how many of you are going to stay until the public comment period. If you do, well, I'll hear from you then. But if you don't, well, please give me a call. You all have my phone number. If you don't, well, I can give it to you real quick. But just, if you would, give me a call. Thank you. And I'm sorry, Donna.
That's fine. Thank you. I'm happy to report I only have one slide. However, we do have 14 items to discuss. So You may get bored at looking at this one slide for the duration. But as Ben mentioned, we actually started this after the board retreat last year. And we have been working with you publicly on many occasions through work sessions to identify goals for residential development and set up strategies for addressing each and every one of those items. So the text amendment I'll be presenting to you tonight is broken up into categories, and we'll cover each one of these topics, and you can stop me at any point with questions, comments, discussion, but I will at the end of each one of these topics stop and open up for discussion should you have anything to point out. The first item has to deal with conservation subdivisions. That seemed to be the whole topic of what drove most of this text amendment. As you know, conservation subdivisions are a development option in some zoning districts, but a requirement in some as well. Conservation subdivisions have a higher amount of open space dedication, but it also offers opportunities for the developer or the engineer or designer, flexibility in the lot size, because there is no minimum lot size. The designer can set the lot width, the setbacks, and what we have been seeing is some of these subdivisions have small lot size. Some of them have medium to normal, and normal would be about 40,000 square feet. But there's also development density that can be pulled from these conservation subdivisions if you're located in the full service area. So our presentation tonight deals with the agricultural district. That's where it's a requirement. You are required to do a conservation subdivision if you develop more than 5 lots in the agricultural district. And in the SFM district, it's a development option. There was density, I won't use the term bonus, but there is density allocation. If you were located in the full service area, you could actually pull up to 2 units per acre for any type of conservation subdivision. So we're moving that density to another zoning district, and we'll talk about that briefly. So there is a reduction in the development density in the conservation subdivision. It's basically cutting it in half in the full service area and smaller numbers outside of that. It's going to set a minimum lot size. If you are located in the agricultural zoning district, that minimum lot size would be set at 30,000 square feet, whereas previously there was no minimum lot size. And in the SFM zoning district, it sets a minimum lot size at 25,000 square feet, where there was previously no minimum. It also increases setbacks in certain zoning districts. In those zoning districts, there were some concerns about needed fire flow, and as you know, needed fire flow has to deal with the amount of water that's flowing out of a fire hydrant, that determines your setbacks between structures. And in those outlying areas that might be agricultural, that setback needs to be a little bit larger. So we've addressed that to the best that we can in those zoning districts. There is a reduction in lot coverage being proposed now that we have set a minimum lot size at between 25 and 30,000 square feet. There's no need to have that lot coverage at 65%. So we're lowering that down to be consistent with all the rest of the subdivisions. It also establishes a conservation theme. What we have found with some of these subdivisions is they're just designing based on the regulations. They're meeting the ordinance, but there's no theme in conservation. They're not conserving a component of that unless they have wetlands and they're required to. But it also encourages conservation of woodlands. It encourages conservation of those flood zones and protection of them as well. It also establishes screening requirements or buffering between the subdivision and the street. That was one of the items that was brought up during our work session, is that the appearance of some of these subdivisions, the houses were right up at the road. So if open space was established between the entrance of those subdivisions and they landscape those areas, it would make them more appealing. So although this regulation is only being proposed in the conservation subdivision, the board may wish to consider that in the other subdivisions as well. But as it's presented to you tonight, it's just the conservation. It also reestablishes the riparian buffer. The riparian buffer is that area located between wetlands and the individual lots. It's that 30-foot buffer strip that would be placed in open space. It's undisturbed. It reestablishes that in the primary conservation. Previously, that was excluded from the primary conservation. It cannot be counted in the minimum lot area. It also, as I mentioned, includes flood zones into secondary conservation. Secondary can be included in the minimum lot area, but that also gives you that development option or establishes that conservation theme. So that covers the items under conservation subdivisions. Are there any comments, questions? We'll talk a little bit more about wetlands and riparian buffers too. Okay, I'll go on to the next item, which is open space. This is item number 4. It's found on page 29 of your packet. What this does is, right now, if you establish open space in your subdivision, it can be owned independently by an individual. It can be transferred to an association. And one concern that we found is that most of the time you're required to do some stormwater infrastructure improvement in your subdivision, which typically goes in open space. And if it's under private ownership, it can tend to cause a long-term maintenance issue. So we've selected 85% as a cap for private ownership of open space. That's taken from the state model that was developed by NC State, and it allows for 15% of that to be either transferred to an association that would then be an area in which you could place that stormwater pond. Any questions related on the open space? Okay, we'll move on to the riparian buffers. This is items 5 and 6 and 7 that begin on page 30 of your packet. Last September, and this is a change that has come forward while we were discussing this text amendment. In September, the General Assembly actually ratified House Bill 44 that limits the county's ability to increase riparian buffers on individual properties that might be regulated by the state or the federal government. And in most cases, what are riparian buffers, where they're located, deal with CAMA jurisdictional areas, and CAMA's buffer is 30 feet. So what we have done across the board is eliminated, we had buffer 1, buffer 2. Buffer 1 was the 30-foot buffer, undisturbed. Buffer 2 was the 20-foot buffer that could be located on individual properties and could be disturbed. We've eliminated that buffer 2, so we're consistent with CAMA regulations on the 30-foot buffer, and that's across the board. This amendment also removes man-made ponds and man-made ditches from the riparian buffer. What we have found just recently this year is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is now claiming jurisdiction on these areas, these man-made ponds and these man-made ditches, and they're not always in their natural state. They were man-made, and they haven't previously been doing that. So we're addressing that in this amendment. It also
Oliver,
yes.
Could you say that again now?
Man-made ponds and man-made ditches were not previously claimed as jurisdictional areas by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So all these ponds if they were man-made, haven't been previously jurisdictional in every single case. What we're seeing today is a lot of those ditches, and it's not regular ditches, it's the larger ditches. They're claiming jurisdiction on those areas as well as man-made ponds.
Isn't that a pretty big deal?
It is a pretty big deal.
I mean,
So we're removing it from our portion of the riparian buffer, but We have no control over what.
Ditches in Currituck?
Larger
Unheard of.
ditches.
I believe that your average citizen sitting at home has no idea that they're probably not surprised, but they probably have no idea that the federal government has just claimed jurisdiction over man-made ponds and
It's
ditches.
not all of them, but it is a
Not yet.
lot of them. Yes,
What?
not yet.
What?
And I don't know what basis they use for when they choose to and when they choose not to.
What does it mean practically? I mean, if they seek jurisdiction or they grant themselves jurisdiction, the second shoe to fall is an enforcement of that jurisdiction. Do you have any idea where they're heading? What's up?
I do not.
I'll tell you what I've heard. I knew of somebody that had excavated a pond in order to build up their lot size, sold the property. The next owner decided he didn't want a pond in his backyard, so he paid to fill it in and got hammered on because he had filled in a pond.
Really?
Oh my.
Can you say comrade?
And from a historical perspective, this all stemmed from navigational waterways, and here we are. Yeah, whatever. And unless you're in a canoe, good luck. It just gets better.
I'm not going to speculate, but I would imagine the ponds and the ditches and that type of stuff has something to do when there's direct inlet wetland impacts downstream or something. I don't know that at all, but I would to me, the only way it would even make any sense at all is if it was something like that.
That's why you can assume that's not why it's being done.
He has no sense to it. You're right.
Well, and additionally, if they're claiming jurisdiction, you're going to have Mission Creek. You're going to have,
The farmer with the leaking sprinkler system. Need we go any further?
Thank you, Ms. Follower.
yes.
You're welcome. That moves us on to MXR zoning district and cottage home developments. That's item 8 on page 6 of your packet. And the MXR zoning district is where the densities will be found there, as well as planned developments. We have maintained the development densities at 3 units per acre in that zoning district. Actually reduce lot sizes down from 20,000 square feet for individual single-family lots in that district to 15. It will also replace the cottage home development amendment that was previously approved by this board. It's more comprehensive. It addresses more pedestrian items in that amendment. It also addresses the ISO setbacks, as we talked about earlier, and it provides for general development standards for that. So again, this is the zoning district where the development densities can be found. This, in most cases, will require a rezoning by the board, since we don't have a tremendous amount of rezoning, a tremendous amount of MXR zoning in the county. There is some that does exist. However, any multifamily development in that district will require board approval. But single family, if it currently has MXR zoning, probably would not require any further rezonings. The cottage home changes, not a tremendous change. It just built on that amendment that was previously approved by the board. It established more pedestrian access, orientation. It deals with the courtyard. The courtyard that we had in the previous text amendment wasn't very clear. It still maintains the maximum number of units in that cottage home development.
Don, what page are we on? Where are we at? I'm trying
That
to
is
find it.
page 36 of your packet.
36, okay.
It starts on page 36.
I misunderstood you a while ago. I'm sorry.
Donna, I have
I
a,
thought she said 60.
I probably did.
I have a question. On the cottage amendment, that was the correct, we just heard that, not
You
within,
did.
just a couple months ago. There was language in that, if memory serves me correctly, that spoke to two central locations around which the pedestrian activity had to be constructed. My question was then, still is now, how can you have two centers if they're not the same place?
This actually
And-
speaks to that. It speaks to having cottage clusters. And you have a minimum of 4 cottage clusters and a maximum of 10 per cluster. And you cannot exceed 2 clusters or 20 units in a cottage home development.
So I would assume this language in the previous UDO amendment that spoke to multiple centers has now been somehow further defined, where I'm just a simple country boy. When you start talking about 2 or more centers, I mean, I thought a center was a center. You know.
The previous one just said it had to be centered, or the homes had to be centered around a courtyard. Didn't say how many courtyards you could have, and this clarifies that. That was an issue that a lot of times you don't figure these out until you start applying regulation, and that happened to be one of them. So
Thank you.
we've tried to address that. Perimeter buffers, that was a concern, these transitional buffers of the board during the work session. And what this amendment will do is it increases the buffer requirements for residential zoning districts for higher density development. So if we're pulling that residential density from the ag and the SFM and putting it to MXR, if you are rezoning to MXR, you're going to have to install a buffer around that lower zoning district around you. Plan developments. This is a minor change. This is found on page 43 and 44 of your packet. It's item number 10. What this does is it increases the minimum development acreage for a PUD or planned development on the mainland from 10 acres to 50 acres. And on the Outer Banks, it's going from 5 acres to 25 acres. And what that's intended to do is to actually create a community. If you have a tract of land that is 50 acres in size, then you're able to create a neighborhood. Item number 11. This deals with type 1 subdivisions. This is the administrative approval subdivisions, the ones that staff can approve, the ones that do not require board action. Right now, that cap is set at 20 lots. Anything that's presented to our department that contains 20 or fewer lots, we approve. We are proposing to increase that to 50. And that's up for discussion.
I'm sorry. Good. Say that.
20
one more
to
time.
50.
For
Administrative approval. That's subdivisions that staff can approve that will not be required to come before you for action.
okay.
And I know
if it's 21 lots or more, it comes to you for a use permit.
Currently.
Currently, what this would do, it would have to be 51 lots or more to come to you for a use permit. You would see less subdivisions.
Historically, where have we been with that? I know it's been,
Started at 5,
and then it's been all over the board, I know.
went to 20. There was talk one time of it being 100,
Yeah.
but we've moved that back down to 50 for tonight's discussion.
When the UDO was rewritten, the consultant came back and said typically towns, municipalities, and counties are at 100, and that's what they recommended to us, and we said no,
I remember that, yeah.
and we said 20, and
And what was the reason for that? For saying no, going to 20?
just felt like it was too much of a change at once to just throw 100-lot subdivisions out there. If you'll look at most of the counties in the area, the reason you don't see a whole lot of subdivisions on their agendas is because they're done administratively, if they're per the rules and they're not looking for a variance or anything.
Some of the requirements in the ordinance actually start at 20 lots too.
Yeah.
And a point of clarification to the county staff, you're not empowering the county staff with subdivision approval. I mean, the staff still has to look at the simple question that the board has to look at is does the project meet the rules? And if it does, then you're compelled to move forward with it. If it doesn't, then so the county staff will not have discretion, I guess, is in this. So by moving this, it's a matter of trying to manage your workload and trying to find that right balance in your workload. But you're not giving us discretion. You're giving the staff again. They're comparing your rules. Your power is in the rules setting that you do.
They're making the same findings that we would be making.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
And should we get to a point where school capacity becomes an issue, they will all come to you at that point.
I guess my only concern would be giving surrounding neighborhoods or community feedback, which is now when subdivisions come before the board. Now that would be done administratively and potentially take discussion or concerns off the table, unless somehow that's mitigated through community meetings. You know what I mean?
How would that be addressed?
And while I don't think that necessarily, if they meet the requirements, they meet the requirements, because legally that's how we're bound. But, a lot of folks learn a lot at the meetings as to what our limitations are. I would just be concerned that we pull a plug on the opportunity for folks to have input or voice their concerns.
Good point. The community meetings could still be a part of any subdivision project, correct?
Well, right now, the way the ordinance is written, community meetings are only required for rezonings and if you go over 50 lots.
If you go over 50.
Mm-hmm, for subdivision.
I would say one thing about Commissioner Beaumont's point, and this is one thing to consider, is through the use permit process, this board does have the authority to add conditions of approval. And I may want to clarify that authority, but you can, for example, based on testimony, perhaps add a condition of approval regarding buffering or some road alignment or whatever it may be. Staff has some authority to add conditions of approval. We don't typically do that. We generally stay with what the ordinance requires. So that would be probably one slight difference. But part of that is if you're not going to do use permits, then have confidence in your subdivision ordinance. Know that what's built is going to reflect what you want to be built.
Well, to that point, what I have found, and I think what we found the last 3 years, is that not one size fits all. And depending on the specifics of where that's going in, what I have seen, we have different restrictions when we hear people voice their concerns that we will put in, but that doesn't mean we establish with all of it. See what I'm saying? They change depending on the particular, and I think Commissioner Beaumont was speaking to that point.
We've had meetings where we've had residents express a concern about the way this is, whatever it is, and we've actually had the developer say, you know what, I have no problem doing that. And that is an opportunity for working together. That my only concern is that we take that off the table if that's done administratively.
Good point.
Well, I would question then, if I live next to a 20-lot subdivision, why am I not afforded the same thing?
So all subdivisions over one lot.
You brought it up. I'm just asking the question.
I know. I understand.
I mean, somebody that's next to a 19-lot subdivision has concerns too.
Okay.
Is all subdivisions special use? I ought to know the answer to that. But
All subdivisions over 20 lots require a use permit at this
Okay.
point.
What's-
And if they get within a certain threshold of school capacity, then every subdivision comes to you for a special
okay,
use.
so if it's a special use, well, then there's a public hearing.
That's correct.
So we're talking about a moot point. If
Well,
it's
you're mo-
over
you're
3
moving the pu-
lots, it's a special use permit.
What this ordinance amendment would do would move that
Push it
public
to
hearing
50.
from 21 lots to 51 lots.
Just a question. In the incidences where we do have people that speak out and they point out a particular concern and the engineer, developer, whatever, acquiesces to that and says, what kind of mechanism can we put in, if any, that would allow for those? I mean, I don't know. It starts becoming difficult then. I understand that. But I also understand if you preclude it.
I would say number one is a lot of the components of this amendment, in fact, address many of the concerns that you've been trying to address through use permits. Less density transition standards, more landscaping. So a lot of what you hear is in this amendment.
Okay.
Beyond that, you'd have to give the staff some sort of authority to add conditions. But I can't answer that question on the fly tonight. What that would be or how that would look like.
I mean, I think you need to be careful when you're considering giving the staff that authority and to ensure that if you do, that there is clear, specific direction and criteria so that the staff is acting in an objective and not a subjective manner.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay.
Anything else? Okay.
We'll move on to the next item. Item 12 is pedestrian circulation, found on page 49. This actually clarifies trails, sidewalks, and pathways. It also increases the width of sidewalks from 4 feet to 5 feet. And what that does is it addresses the ADA accessibility codes. And instead of requiring turnarounds every 200 feet, it's a uniform 5-foot wide sidewalk all the way through the development. It establishes a width for a pathway, which are those types of trails that you typically see not along the sides of streets, but throughout the subdivision. It establishes a width of 8 feet, so it allows for good movement, two-way movement on those pathways. Item 13 is floor area ratio. That's on page 52. And this one is actually a correction. It fixes an item that we identified during this process. Right now, floor area ratios apply to residential and non-residential, and historically, floor area ratios have never applied to residential structures. So this corrects that issue. And floor area ratio deals with the number of stories in a home, or in a building. Not only do you have lot coverage requirements, but you have floor area ratio requirements as well. And if you had a multi-story commercial building, you couldn't exceed so many square feet based on the size of the lot. Item 14, which is the last item, this too was added towards the end. And what this does is this actually fixes an issue dealing with single-family dwelling tenancy. There is a statement in there that we are requesting removal, and that is the tenancy. It's the month-to-month rental issue. That addresses any of our vacation rentals as well. So we're looking to fix that. At the planning board meeting, when they made their recommendation, they actually established 3 conditions of their approval. They established effective date. One concern that was expressed is if you had projects that were being discussed by developers right now with landowners or purchased by landowners, from landowners, and they had paid a certain amount of money for the property based on the amount of density that they could pull off that property, that they should be able to bring forward their projects So they established an effective date of 9 months from the adoption date by the board. They also set a condition that conditional rezonings that were approved by this board, that were approved under this current ordinance, would be vested as well, that they could continue to develop under the regulations that they designed their conditional rezoning under. And then the third item, which isn't addressed anywhere in here, has to do with phase projects. If you have a phase development that is being presented before you, and they come forward with a plan to do the entire subdivision in its preliminary plat stage, well, they have 2 years in which to complete that project. And if you have a relatively large project that's phased, that can tend to be a problem. I mean, number one, you probably don't want it to develop out that fast. And number two, they probably can't meet that need the market may not, is what drives that phasing of it. So what they actually suggested is to allow the phase development, that final approval of that phase development, to vest the remaining preliminary plat approval of that development. That concludes my presentation.
If I could, and I apologize, on section 10.4.3, residential use classification.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, it's my understanding we have prohibitions against single night rentals. Is that correct?
That's typically handled in another, like a hotel motel type of arrangement or rooms for
How
rent.
would that affect this, given it's come up before? This has come up before, the question as to, in the past and currently, there are situations where single night
This
is arguably taking place. But apparently there's some question as to whether or not it's allowable or permitted. How does this affect single night rentals going forward? As opposed to, I think we had, 30 days or a week, or how did it work for?
It's 30 right now. So
30.
technically today, if you rent a property for a period less than 30 days, it's in violation of the ordinance.
Now of course that's problematic on the beach.
Yes.
right.
So that's all. We have just struck that sentence rather than put back a week or 4 days or 2 days. And I think what you would have to do in terms of if you got to a vacation rental that was rented for 1 day or 2 day, then I think you'd have to look at just what is the principal use of that, how was the building built, what was it built to be used as. So, for example, if it's rented every day and there's a concierge and it operates like a hotel, then the property operates in that manner, then I think you have a code enforcement violation. Regardless of what the tenancy clause says, I think you're running it not like a conventional single-family dwelling. If you have a house and it's a vacation rental, and occasionally you rent it for a short period, I think I would look at that as ancillary or not the principal purpose for which that house was built. The point is there's some gray areas in that when you work in a county that has more than 4,000 housing units that are vacation rentals.
Well, this seems to remove, at first glance, the restriction against basically overnight hotels that are not actually overnight rentals, that are not actually hotels or motels.
It also removes the restriction for weekly rentals.
All right, I would throw that out to the rest of the board. Is that something that, I mean, the weekly rentals, I can understand it because that's what happens over on the beach. Overnight rentals in non-hotel/motel environments, do we want to open that up, or do we just want, I just proffer that question for the board's review or comment.
Does bed and breakfast, is that a separate designation, or hunting clubs, are that separate designations? Or?
Bed and breakfast and hunt clubs are defined very specifically, so we'd obviously know if something was being used for bed and breakfast or a hunt club.
So there's no problem with the overnight occupancy for those. So you're just talking basically residential dwelling. Is that I'm trying to figure out.
I guess what I'm trying to do, because I remember, and I don't remember the specifics, but I know that there has been incidences where that has been an issue, and it's been a subject of complaints, and I'm just wondering if that is going away or whether we should just disregard it. We're going to allow. I mean, I don't remember the specific anecdotal issues that were voiced before, but I do remember there were some. And they were addressed around single night stays at ostensibly places that were weekly or monthly rentals.
But the other challenge you run into is, your typical weekly vacation homes also rent for a long weekend or rent for a weekend. So you're back on that slippery slope as to what's the minimum.
I'm not necessarily pro or against
Right.
or whatever. I'm just saying we are making a significant change, and I don't know at this point in time what the unintended consequences are for that change. That's all. I'm saying that now just because, like anything else, you've got unintended consequences.
The staff could do additional analysis, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest, if that's the case, you at least modify that month to 1 week. At least change the month tenancy to a week tenancy and give us time to do some additional analysis, because there are some other definitions that the county attorney and myself have looked at, and Donna as well, related to kind of better defining single-family dwellings that are in vacation rental programs. So there are some other things we want to look at. Mostly we were trying to remove the violation that we've created in the entire county by having a month-to-month tenancy requirement.
And I guess I'm just trying to make sure on this 10.43, as he said, that is for people that are renting. That is not for the homeowner that owns his home and has a hobby or his vehicle parked there or whatever it might be. This is only for rental properties?
It is for single-family dwellings, manufactured homes,
So if I own a home and I live there for
apartments.
30 years and it talks about, it associated with household living, recreational activities, raising pets, hobbies, that's for me.
It is.
I'm not sure I understand what the issue is.
Don't either.
I mean, are we next going to start telling people what color drapes they can have in their house? I mean, where are we going? That's what I want to know.
This issue rose in particular in the matter that's still pending before the Court of Appeals. We're waiting for the decision. The Latondra House on the North Beach. The plaintiffs in that matter raised this as a issue in that litigation, and claim that because of this language, we describe the characteristic of a residential use as tenancy arranged on a month-to-month or longer basis. And so their argument was that the Latondra House, which would admittedly be rented for a week long at a time, as many other houses as you just mentioned and we know on the Outer Banks are weekly rentals, would all be in violation of the UDO and could not be any longer classified or deemed to be residential uses of property. And so this is to go ahead and clean out at least that potential argument that at least has been now proffered in this case by these plaintiffs.
And I understand that, and again, I'm not trying to make an issue where there is none, but I do remember there have been discussions and there have been problems or whatever, and I'm just pointing out that we're changing something now.
I mean, the point being, and we argued at the Court of Appeals, we need to look at the use of the property. How's it being used? I don't care if you call it wedding or event house. If it's being used as a single-family residential use, what we characteristically understand to be a residential use, and that's what it is. That doesn't make it commercial just because I happen to have some wedding or some event during my week stay at this particular structure. So that really is part and parcel of the entire issue in trying to just clear out this potential argument going forward. That we're looking at the use, not that it might be rented for a day, but that it might be rented for a week, not that it might be rented for a month, but how is it being used? If it's being used, like Mr. Woody was saying, you could come and rent a room nightly. Well, maybe you start thinking or looking at whether it's becoming something other than a residential use. It's becoming more of a motel or hotel kind of use. So, like Mr. Woody said, that becomes an enforcement issue at that point, as you try to make a determination and interpretation of the ordinance, what is the use being made of this particular property, and is it in keeping with the requirements of the ordinance?
So then it would be, we still have other means to address single night stays at a non-motel, hotel type
Yes.
of situation.
But I still come back to the
that's my
same thing
question.
about, Mike called the hunter, and I have 7 dogs, and, all of a sudden you tell me now I maybe have additional regulations for me having my 7 dogs on my 10 acres.
This isn't prohibiting that by any means. What it's talking about are what are other things that we commonly and normally associate with a residential use of property, and so that's what it says there in the second sentence under characteristics. Accessory uses commonly associated with household living are recreational activities, raising of pets, hobbies, and the parking of occupants' vehicles. So that what you're describing actually would bolster the argument that my property is being used for a residential purpose.
Okay, I just want to make sure for those. Okay.
I thank you because you clarified it for me.
So what we're talking about here is 10.4.3 is going to do what again? Explain it to me one more time. What this will do, the change, please.
What this does is it actually removes the tenancy requirement. So if you were to rent a home in a less than a month-to-month basis, on a weekly basis, it cleans that up, clarifies it, and would allow you to do it.
Okay.
Legally, under the pretense that it is used as a single-family dwelling.
From a single-family dwelling perspective.
Yes,
And historically, that's what we have that goes on today.
yes.
We don't have day-to-day or nightly rentals that goes on today.
We may. I
mean, I
can't
don't
speak
know
to
that.
that.
I don't
It
know.
could occur. I mean, you could have homes on the beach that rent for a weekend or some other type of scenario, but it's still being used as a single-family dwelling.
It's still the entirety of a structure being used. Now, it becomes a much different story if all of a sudden you're finding a residential structure with 8 bedrooms, and I can go and rent an individual bedroom, and someone that's totally unrelated or unknown to me rents the bedroom next door, and you start then becoming more of a hotel or a boarding house or something other than a residential use. But what this does, it gets rid of whether I lease my property or not, and how long, from falling into some kind of consideration or characteristic of whether my property is being used residentially or not.
So in essence, you could rent your house out for one night to a family.
Yes.
But you're not going to rent out individual bedrooms.
Correct.
Right. That obviously would not be allowed and not be deemed a residential use of property.
That clears it up some for me.
So this is presented to you in sections, item by item. So should you choose to approve, not approve, remove, act on, not act on, you can do that.
Can we go back to page 9? If
Sure.
we could. I just have a question. I just want to get back here.
Is that page 9?
Packet
No, I
9?
want to go to page 9, which was part of that, right at the front of that packet.
Okay.
Start. We get back to it. I got to go a ways. And I wanted to let you continue until I really interrupted, so that's why I wanted to wait. I'm out here. Under policy HN2 on page 9. Where it asks the section where we talk about having large mini estates at 5 to 10 acres. And the county shall therefore encourage alternatives to large lot developments through innovative development. That's what we do now?
That is a policy statement that exists today. And
Right.
yes, those development options are available.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
All right. Are there any questions? I don't see anybody for public hearing for PB 15-17, which is what we have been hearing. I don't see anybody signed up for
Mr.
public
Bissell.
hearing.
Bissell's here.
Okay. And that's fine. I just didn't see anybody, so I didn't know who to call.
Didn't put your name on the dotted line.
Sure. We'll open the portion of the hearing now for the applicant or for anyone else who wants to make a comment. I don't know that there's any applicant, so this will be for anybody that wants to speak to it for the public hearing. And I would just ask, as pro forma, name and address.
Mark Bissell with Bissell Professional Group, and my office is in Kitty Hawk. And I just wanted to speak to a couple of the items on this long list. The first being the effective date. The planning board did recommend the 9 months, and the changes do potentially have a significant impact on land values. So the purpose for the 9 months would be to allow people who have invested money, who have signed contracts, who have started the planning process, hired consultants, and so forth, in reliance on the regulations that are in place to continue those, rather than having to have the game changed in the middle of the project. So I would encourage you to consider that effective date of 9 months. The second one is the phasing, and Donna briefly went over that, and I kind of wanted to just give you an example. Laurel Woods is one that had a phasing plan that was actually approved under the old UDO that did have the provision that stated that if you have put your first phase to record, then all of your phases are vested as long as they have preliminary plat approval. The current UDO is silent on that issue. It doesn't say that you're not vested if you as to your other phases, but it doesn't say that you are. So this would really kind of clean that up and give developers the confidence to know that they are in fact vested. Laurel Woods, we've been putting about a 40-lot phase to record every other year on the average. So that's been going on for a number of years and did rely on that phasing agreement. So this would basically make the new UDO similar to the old UDO in that regard. And I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Bissell.
Thank you. Just in support of the effective date, the approval process is fairly long and can be cumbersome. Just to give you kind of an example, to do a conservation and development subdivision, you prepare a conservation and development plan. You do some preliminary wetlands work. Typically, we'd have a pre-application conference and submit a plan to the staff. We would then have a site meeting with staff, which would result in perhaps some comments and some changes, and then have a conservation and development plan approval, which is a non-binding approval, but that process would typically take a month to a month and a half. At that point, you're starting with your more detailed work, your boundary surveys, topographic surveys, having the wetlands delineated. Then trying to get the Corps of Engineers to confirm the wetlands so that you know exactly what land you have to work with. It's at that point that you can really start designing your preliminary plat with solid information. At that point, you design the plat, you stake the lots for the health department to evaluate. Sometimes some of those lots fail. The health department turns down, say, a section of the development, and you have to reconfigure it and restake the lots, wait for the health department to go back out and reevaluate those lots. And so there's another month that's gone by. So all of and just about every development has some kind of situation that has to be worked through. So what I'm trying to show you is that 9 months goes by quickly. And development is a risky business, and I'm just encouraging it to not be riskier than it has to be. And I appreciate you considering that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bissell. and this will be for Mr. Woody. And what initially we did, part and parcel of this, it's my understanding, is we were trying to address some of the concerns, particularly, I guess, in the Moyork area about density. And what we were seeing happening with the, I don't want to say exploitation, but the utilization of the full service infrastructure that allowed the land that was ostensibly, really you couldn't develop it at high density, to now be developed at high density. One of the things that, and I'm going to ask this, is unintended consequences. 9 months. Well, let me back up. One of the things that I'm concerned about is if we don't put some meaningful limitation, there will be a rush for everybody to get a plat and get it recorded so as to take advantage of the old UDO's enhanced density, if you will, for lack of a better term, and more or less reduce the efficacy or really the reason for which we are looking at this. So my question would be is what nobody, I don't believe anybody on this board wants to hurt anybody that's got something in the process, that's got something in the pipeline, has already conditional rezoning, has already a plat, or in the process of it. But we don't want, I don't believe, is a rush by people who had no intention of doing anything now but see that there's a time limit and want to jump in and get the extra density. I think 9 months would allow that. And my question would be, what would be a reasonable time to address those who are already in the pipeline, those who are already working towards something, to not be injured, but wouldn't, as an unintended consequence, cause a flood of applications that this board and the next board will have to deal with for the next 2 years, thereby relegating what we do tonight as meaningless for the purposes of that. Mr. Woody.
That's obviously a difficult question to answer because that's going to vary. If you have a small site and it's upland, it's just farmland, no wetland issues, can you get a 20-lot subdivision turned around in 9 months? If you're zoned, I would think absolutely you could. So obviously some of the smaller sites can probably meet that deadline very easily. Now there probably are examples when you have very, very large sites that have complex wetland issues. It may take, as Mr. Bissell said, it may take every bit of 9 months. What the staff had done during the planning board meeting is we had kind of thrown out 6 months as a timeline. I'm not a developer, so I can't speak practically from that end of things. I'm not going to say Mr. Bissell isn't being accurate in what he's saying in terms of his timing for the project he references. But we kind of fell upon 6 months because based on our observation, we felt like that seemed reasonable for a typical site to prepare a preliminary plat, provided we were assuming you've already got the land under contract or you've gotten past that first step.
In other words, not to put words in your mouth, but the 6 month time limit that you placed were basically subdivisions that were already in some form of moving forward, not a from scratch, go out, go shopping, go find a lot and try and get it under the old. So you felt that 6 months was reasonable for anybody in process to get that through the process.
Yes, for in a typical average setting. So. And at that point,
which isn't going to capture everybody.
It won't. That's correct. And there's probably folks that can come in 6 months and get something done as well. So it's not going to capture everybody on either end of that spectrum.
Mr. Woody, let's say that someone is in that situation and the 6 month, for some reason, as Mr. Bissell alluded to, run out before they could get finished. Is there any action that they could request that would give them a continuance or?
I mean, the only thing I could think is they'd have to come back to the Board of Commissioners and somehow ask for the effective date of the text amendment to be altered. I don't think you could do it on a I don't think you could alter that effective date on a case by case basis.
No.
So, for example, you'd have to, if you made the effective date 6 months, which is July, whatever that is, you would then have to consider extending that effective date to, say, August 1st, which would then be an extension applicable to anybody that was in the process.
Okay, let me ask this question then. If the intent certainly is not to injure anyone who is already in the stream, but if setting a deadline time may result in that happening, is there any other kind of parameters that we can put in play that says maybe if you have something entered in the system now, well then, if it takes you 8 months or 9 months to get done, you're still vested into doing that? Or I'm just asking. I don't know.
I think the effective date of the ordinance has to be tied to some actionable item. So obviously submitting a completed application is really easy. I'm trying to think. You could say, I don't know if Don, if you have any thoughts. I mean, there's really not much happens before the application for the preliminary plat. So I don't really know what else you could use as kind of your threshold for when people are kind of in the game, so to speak, or in the process.
I'm just asking. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
I didn't get here in time to sign in to speak, but can I, or is that done?
You can speak. Again, name and address.
I'll make it very brief. Good evening. This is Wendy Shannon, 204 Puddin Ridge Road. I read some of this as much as I could today. I'm very grateful to see some of these changes in here that are proposed. And I guess I'm on the opposite end from the developers. I want this thing as soon as possible. As you all well know, we've spoken before about things right there in Moyock. I don't want to see anybody injured either, but I would definitely encourage you not to go any longer than is absolutely necessary and try and find some sort of way to injure the least amount of people, understanding that if it gets in the pipeline, then we're going to have to try and fight it there. It's better to stop it beforehand and make the changes and get them in effect. So I'd ask you for your careful consideration on that. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Anybody? Yes, sir.
Justin Old, 1285 Tulse Creek Road. Out of respect to everyone, I agree that obviously changes are coming, and we welcome them. However, I would like to figure out some sort of situation, or time frame to do things. I don't know if, Ben, can you tie them to any sort of like site evaluations or anything like that? How does that, is there any?
I don't know. I don't know that you would. I don't know that you would tie your effective date of your ordinance to performance under some other set of standards. I don't guess that's impossible. It's probably not typical, but
I mean, conceivably you could relate it to some other agency's permit or process. But again, I think as Mr. Woody's saying, our general rule has been application date is determinative of whether a project is deemed to have begun.
Well, an application date and a preliminary plat approval are miles apart in time. If somebody files an application, it may be 3 or 4 months before they ever get a preliminary plat approval. So how about clarifying, what are you saying that you recommend a permit be submitted by July 1st versus a preliminary plat approval by July 1st?
yeah, I would. The staff would certainly recommend that the effective date be tied to the submission of a complete application, not the approval of a project. So if the effective date was 6 months for the submission, you're probably looking at the project actually being approved in 9 or 10 months.
Okay, because I know that preliminary plat approvals where vesting happens.
Correct.
But what you're saying is under the old ordinance, if they submit an application before July 1st, we would let them proceed, is what you're recommending under the old ordinance.
I'm recommending you allow them to proceed under the old ordinance.
as long as a completed application.
Is submitted within whatever timeline the board establishes.
Okay.
Seems very reasonable.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's, how does that differ with what Mr. Bissell was saying?
Mr. Bissell requested that effective date be 9 months
For just a
for
completed
submitting a
application?
completed application, correct.
Okay, I thought we were talking about a preliminary plat as well.
I did too.
Everything else, yeah.
I punt.
Okay, any other questions from the commissioners?
Yeah,
Well, I'm sorry, go, hold on. Anyone else wish to speak? All right, hearing none, and at this point in time, go ahead with your question.
It's not a question, it's a statement here. Definitely understand the July 1st completed application, is that correct, Ben?
But the staff had said 6 months for the, now what the only thing I can think, the only variation I can think, and this may be, I don't know if the board even wants to consider this, but you have an effective date where you have, usually staff looks for a completed application. If an application is not complete, we then give a certain time period for the applicant to bring in whatever items are needed. So I mean, you could vary it a little bit by saying an application submitted by whatever, July 1st, and it must be complete by July 15th. But I don't know if that just complicates things more. That's the only thing I can see in terms of providing a little leeway for the board, other than giving a longer date, such as a 9-month window.
I understand that. And then again, on page 47, when we're talking about subdivision from 20 to 50 for staff to approve, we've had enough subdivisions that, what do you call a small one or a large one? And I just, going to 50 is, I think, we're opening up where we're taking the ability of the citizen to come up and talk to us. A way I would ask that we stay at 20.
So my question is one of process. Do you want to go item by item or as a whole? My recommendation would be item by item. In case there's discussion on an individual item, we wind up losing the baby in the bathwater if there's a contrary opinion on a specific item.
I agree. Any comment from the board? Well, okay. Hearing no comment or hearing no further question, I want to close the public hearing, and I will accept a motion from the board.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to adopt the text amendments presented with the exception of the change of, like Commissioner Hall stated, the 20 to 50. I'd like to keep that as stated in the current ordinance, and as it is consistent with the goals, objectives, and policies of the land use plan and is reasonable in the public interest, because the amendment will improve compatibility among uses and will ensure efficient development in the county and result in logical and orderly development pattern with the following conditions: that an effective date of this amendment shall be July 1, with proper applications received by June 1, given the vetting time for the proper applications. Conditional zonings approved under the current UDO shall not be subject to this text amendment. And then I'd also like to include the approval that the preliminary plat for one or more phases be vested through the project of all phases of the development if the proper applications are vetted before the July 1 deadline.
And I would second that.
Okay. We have before us a motion by Commissioner Gilbert, and we have a second by Commissioner Hall. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
We usually have discussion before we vote.
Oh, okay. By all means. By all means.
My question is Commissioner Gilbert just said June 1st, not July 1st. And my other question to this board is, why is somebody with a 20-lot subdivision considered, since y'all brought it up, why is it okay for them to not have any input, but when you hit the 21 lot, the neighbors get to have input?
My response would be, I thought she said July 1st. I maybe.
She did.
She did say
She,
July 1st.
she did say July 1st.
Second of all, is when we go from what we consider maybe a small neighborhood to a large neighborhood, is my thought on why we're staying at 20 versus 50. It is consistent now with what we have at 20, and although it would make our time less, not having to hear those 30 other houses, I think we're at a point now where I believe staying with the 20 is more consistent with what the public would want.
I don't know what the public wants. I think somebody's having a 20-lot subdivision that they don't want next to them is just as aggravated as somebody with a 21-lot subdivision.
It's just less aggravated people. And
Depends on the neighborhood.
And my retort to the 20 versus 50 would be, well, why not 100 or why not 200? I think somewhere in there we throw a dart at the dartboard and see if it works. And if at the end of the day, my recommendation would be, if they become, I don't mean to say rubber stamp, but if it becomes an automatic, then certainly I think we should look at increasing the lots approval by staff. But I too would concur with the 20 remaining that number of lots.
I hear what Mr. Woody had to say earlier, and one of the reasons that they're suggesting to do that is because they're trying to fix all the different issues and problems that we have been having. And with the text amendments, I can live with either one. I'm whatever. If 20 is what the board wants to go with, I can certainly support that. We've been doing it. So, but I'm just saying, I think that there's reasoning behind why they're trying to do what they're doing.
I'm not sitting here saying 50's the number.
No, me neither.
I'm arguing the opposite. Why, when you cross the 20 threshold, is suddenly public comment's important, but before 20, it's not. And that's just my question.
Well, Mr. Woody, if I recall, when we put the 20 in place, that was because we were hearing small developments of 8 and under at that time, correct? And so we did bring that up to 20, threshold making an administrative approval for 20 and below.
Yeah, there's probably two reasons why the 20 was established. One is I think there was frustration among non-developers or families or people that are just cutting out a lot or two, that perhaps their parent parcel was subdivided 6 times over the past 20 years, and now all of a sudden they're coming to cut a lot out to sell, and they've got to go through a 3-4 month public hearing process. So some of the getting up to 20 was allow the smaller kind of local folks the ability to cut lots a little bit easier. The second reason for 20 was because that is a number. Now, this may be somewhat arbitrary. That's a number when we have certain things, certain ordinance requirements that kick in. So at 20 lots, you have to do, if you have water access, you've got to preserve some sort of like common frontage or open space to allow like shared access to the water. I think 20 requires boat and RV parking areas. There's probably 1 or 2 I'm missing, but there's sidewalks come in at 20. So there's also some ordinance standards that kick in at 20. So that's where the number came from. It was twofold.
Good deal.
Mr. Woody, I thought we had already addressed the family that wanted to break out lots up to 5, and we just put in a time constriction that they had to wait a certain period of time for it to come back, but not that it was prohibited.
That's correct. You have actually, since even the 20, you've allowed a waiver, so to speak, of true family subdivisions. So if you are in fact cutting a lot out for a child or a grandchild, you have some ability, some exception from a lot of the procedural rules. But the under 20 also gives some exception for just maybe you're cutting a lot out just to sell it because you want to cut a lot out to sell it. So,
one last comment. I'm not advocating to hurt the folks doing 20 or less either. I'm just saying exactly what Commissioner Paul Beaumont said, is 20 was just a dart thrown on the board, because I was on the board when this was done. And there was not any great big discussion about, well, 20 does this and that. It was just a number that was preliminary and thrown out there and adopted.
I believe the number was different than that originally, and 20 is what it ended up being.
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I get clarification on the motion?
Yes, that's what I was going to ask for, to see where we were.
There was a comment about applications being submitted June 1st, but an
Correct.
effective date of July 1st.
Yeah, I had stated the July 1 effective date for the amendment, and with proper applications received by June 1st, only because of Mr. Woody said that, if applications are received, it may be 15, 20 days before they're going to be through that final approval. And if someone comes in on June 29th and submits an application and it's not at the approval or proper application, then that throws them out of the water. So,
But don't that only give them 5 months in for completed application?
We already, the
and
end of January.
we've been doing this for a year, and this would give those persons that are already in the pipeline that opportunity to go ahead and, instead of approving it tonight, that gives them at the beginning of the budget year, which I like to make decisions on budget year or calendar year, and I certainly don't want to stretch this out to January of 17.
Okay, just for clarification again, do we have clarification? We're talking about,
My understanding is the application needs to be submitted no later than June 1st, and it has to be a completed application no later than July 1st, and the ordinance becomes effective July 1st. So if someone submits something June 1st and they're missing a letter or a document,
and they can follow
they
up
have
and
up
correct it.
3 more days to complete that after staff reviews and determines. That's my understanding of the motion.
Now, the motion, does it include the 20 or the 50?
It included the 20.
So, the motion before us now is as read with the further conditions that June 1st for the application to be submitted, July 1st for it to be a completed application, with the continuance of the 20 lot requirement threshold for board review. Is that correct? Is that everybody's understanding?
Yes.
We have a motion, we have a,
Just one more thing. Why would someone submit an incomplete application? I don't understand what we're talking about
Mr.
here.
Woody,
When you,
well,
I will say that there's a lot of information that comes in with these submittals, and it's not entirely uncommon that somebody is missing, like literally like a letter or something relatively simple that was just an oversight. So it's not unusual after the application is submitted that in the next week or two to collect another piece of document or another piece of information or two. So that's not entirely unreasonable.
okay.
so this does beat the 6 months deal.
You got to have some semblance of an application together by June 1st, but I guess you could submit it and be missing like health department evaluations, and you still have 30 days to get those evaluations in. So it gives a little bit of, it does basically give you to July 1st.
And again, staff's recommendation was the 6 month thing.
We recommended 6 months at the planning board meeting.
I think, Commissioner Idlet, what this does is the June 1st requirement to have it submitted is build a 30-day cushion in there so that a unintended failure to submit something can be noticed and reported, so the applicant has the ability to cure that in the 30 days and by July 1st have a completed
I
application.
understand that. It's just different from what we had discussed earlier, I think. And I mean, that's fine. I can support either one, but it just
well,
different than what
and
we
again,
were
my
talking about.
intentions are if a person comes in with an application the last day of the month in June and it's not completed, then it wouldn't be qualified under the old ordinance. It would be considered under the new ordinance because it's not a proper submitted application. So I was just trying to give some wiggle room in there so when the application comes in, there's a little leeway.
All right, well, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
All right,
I'm going to say no as well.
all righty. Motion passes 5-2. Now, we've been going at this for over 2.5 hours. I'll ask the board if they would like to take a 5-minute recess. If not, we'll go on. What is the pleasure of the board?
5 minutes, please.
5 minutes.
5-minute recess it is. We will have a 5-minute recess and return. Okay, we're going to reconvene from recess. The next item for public hearing is public hearing and action on resolution creating the Backwoods Reserve Saddlebrook Water Service District. And for that, I will turn it over to Mr. McCree.
Mr. Chairman, the board has previously approved Saddlebrook subdivision located at Northwest Backwoods Road and South Mills Road.
Do I need to open the hearing?
No, well,
Yes, I'll go ahead and open the hearing. Okay, I'm sorry.
and there will be following that a subdivision called Backwoods Reserve. Our UDO, and as you recall, those subdivisions plan for a community, privately owned and operated community water system. The Unified Development Ordinance requires that when a developer creates a subdivision that is to be served by a privately owned utility, that a service district is to be created. The purpose for the service district's creation is not that it's going to become operational immediately, but rather it's to lie dormant unless and until such time as the private utility operator fails or is unable to continue forward with providing the water or sewer, whatever the utility might be. So this is at the request of the developer and as required by the Unified Development Ordinance before you, pursuant to your authority under Article 16, Chapter 153A of the General Statutes, that allows for you to create a service district, in this case for water supply and distribution system. This matter was properly advertised at least 1 week prior to tonight's public hearing. Previously, for a period of 4 weeks, a report which is contained in your agenda package was prepared, giving a brief analysis of the purpose, rationale, and need for this particular service district. That report was filed with the clerk to the Board of Commissioners as required by statute, and notice of this public hearing was given to all property owners, which is in this case is the developer only, as no lots, we understand, have been sold yet within these respective subdivisions. Again, the statute requires that a public hearing be held on the creation of this service district, and then you must adopt the resolution that is provided to you at your seats tonight if you determine that it is appropriate for the creation of this service district. I'm glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? Hearing none. I don't have anyone signed up for this public hearing either. Would there be anyone that wishes to speak to it? Seeing none and having no questions from the board, I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for the chair will entertain a motion.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion made by Commissioner O'Neill and a second by Ms. Gilbert. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We're moving into old business now. This is consideration and action on ordinance amending Chapter 2, Article 3 of the Code of Ordinances to establish Animal Services and Control Advisory Board. This is a second reading. Chair will entertain a motion.
Motion for approval.
Second.
We have a motion for an approval from Commissioner Gilbert and a second from Commissioner O'Neill. Discussion.
Commissioner?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No. I would like to take and again reiterate the fact that I believe that we have a department head that would be an ex officio member under any other board, not an appointed member. The same thing could be said about the animal control officer. I believe that it would be in our best interest and the running of the shelter for each commissioner to have a person that they appoint to this board that may have some of these qualifications, but not exclusively, to help with the adopt-a-thons, to help with education, to help with the collecting of money and donations to help with the volunteers. That was, I think, the original intent of this board, and it's changed just a little bit, but I think it would be better suited with that, where it would be the 2 ex officio and then the 7 citizens that we would look for that, versus the way it is proposed at this time. So I would ask for your consideration there.
Okay, any other discussion?
Yes, sir, Chairman Griggs. Just reading through it again, I think the directives and the goals are well written, and it does establish and define what we would like to see this advisory board accomplish for our new animal shelter. The only thing I would want to clarify is I do think that I think 3, probably a minimum of 3 positions from a consensus position from the Board of Commissioners, in my opinion, would be well served. I think the way we have it structured with the current animal shelter staff and the veterinarian, I think that accomplishes a lot for the goals. And I guess I just have a question. If this gets approved tonight, could this be amended later for adding or modifying the number of consensus appointments for the commissioners?
Yes, it can.
Okay, so after approval, we can adjust that if need be?
Yes.
Okay. Then that answered my question. Thank you.
Upon approval, Mr. Chairman, would we then start advertising requests for people to fill out applications for these positions?
Absolutely.
There's one on here that may be that may be difficult, is maybe the one for the grant writer. That, so I don't, and then again, we may be pleasantly surprised that somebody steps up to that. But I concur with Mr. Payment that the duties and expectations are in keeping with the purpose of the animal shelter.
And-
Yeah. Go ahead.
Mr. O'Neill, I can speak to that. We have a tremendous amount of resources of citizens that are in Currituck County that have the experience in grant writing with working with Currituck kids. We've now established our 501(c), and that was, a 6-year process of getting that. And with that, there are a tremendous amount of resource of persons in the county that could fit that. And I don't see us having an issue with that. And we certainly want someone that's experienced in it.
And I hope you're right.
And the citizens won't let us down, I promise you.
I would come back to the same thing on grant writing. The county has people that are grant writers. The county is in charge of the shelter. We hopefully will have a citizen that may come forward with a grant, but we might have somebody who doesn't, and then we have a slot that we haven't filled. Same thing when it comes to a vet tech. We have a veterinarian that we have contracted with, and again, if you want to make the vet an ex officio, that's one thing, but to take in, the board originally, when it was talked about, was again for the purpose of taking the administrative problems away and the day-to-day running and putting it into the other things that would involve where we wouldn't have to have the expenses, the volunteers, the adopt-a-thons, things that would cost extra, that we could get the citizens involved and make them a partnership in this. And that's why I keep leaning back to that, is 7 members. If you want to put ex officio members on there, that's fine, but I think, and I'm not looking to have Mike Hall, the citizen who has no experience in anything when it comes to dogs and never done anything with them or cats. But we have a lot of folks out there that are going to apply, that have these experiences, that may have some vet tech experience, but it should not be the only thing that we look at when we're looking for members.
So, if I understood correctly, because I may be in this may be necessary for a modification. So, one of the concerns that I have is when I'm reading the duties, the original intent of the Animal Services and Advisory Board was to help recommend, in essence, minimize the number of critters that are brought into the shelter and expedite or minimize the amount of time they're spent in the shelter. Encourage and help raise the funds to get them adopted and out to good homes. not to necessarily direct activities at the shelter, direct the county commissioners as to what needs to be. I mean, as I kind of look through the duties, telling us what's going on and trends, and, is it really the intent that this board would tell us what's trending in the animal population out in Currituck County? I'm not sure I see that as essential information for running of the government of the county. That's why we have an animal services division.
And that's how I understood it originally also, what you're saying.
But the trends that you speak of, Commissioner Beaumont, is just input that the citizens are gathering from different areas, different events they may be going to, different things that's due to the county. The way I read it is that advisory board then would bring to the animal shelter staff to help to show different ways that they see different trends happening throughout the area with adoptions and how things are going. That's the way I look at it, and I see it helping us.
I think we keep forgetting about, this is an advisory board. We're not talking about the volunteer organizations that are out there who's still going to be doing a whole lot of the stuff that we're sitting here talking about, the adopt-a-thons and this and that and other. Those are the folks who's going to be out here day to day doing that type of stuff. The advisory board is more of a, as the job description there kind of lays out, advisory group to help in the how the shelter runs and just recommendations and that kind of stuff. You still got all the volunteer help that hopefully is going to be a part of the deal that's going to be tying into this stuff too. The advisory board could even play a role in coordinating that volunteer help and stuff.
I guess one of the things, we have Gina that's in charge of the animal services. Are we, as the Board of Commissioners, really going to sit down, or is it expected that we're going to hear a program about encouraging? I understand reports from the entities within the county as we normally get, but is this board going to be voting on programs to promote and encourage awareness of animal care services? That's, in my mind, what animal services does. This board would work with them to help identify those programs, but to me, the way some of these tasks are driven, we're going to be making not quite day-to-day decisions on the operation of the shelter, but close to that. And I just have a concern that that's not really what my thought of the intent of this board was. The intent of this board was to help coordinate with the volunteers and to get out there and get animals adopted and out of the shelter.
And that's the way I read it. So that's why I interpreted and read it, that's what the board's going to do.
Okay, well,
just advise us.
To speak to two issues. First off, inasmuch as Ms. Maurer is on the board, she will be hearing firsthand the trends and the issues that will allow her, as the administrator of the animal shelter, to then make decisions and or interact with the county manager. And because the county manager, under our system, is going to run all the employees. It has never and is not our job to run the various departments in the county. So I don't envision us as running anything. But inasmuch as Ms. Maurer is on that board and will be hearing and will be participating in the data that will be driven, it'll allow her to better make decisions and or if there are issues or trends that impact what we're doing now, to discuss it with the county manager and make the necessary judgments. But I didn't read this at all as putting this board in any kind of administrative position. Quite the contrary. Now, the reason we're doing this is because there were criticisms and complaints that we weren't moving fast enough. So we started the process. The last meeting, we introduced this, it was read, and it passed 6-1. That required under state law that we had to have a second reading. The second reading, the reason we have done it this way is because under state law, if there's substantive changes on a second reading. Well, we can't do substantive changes under law. We'd have to scrap the whole thing and go back. So what we have now upon approval of this, we're not picking any members. We're not deciding. We're going to start advertising. And we have a period of time between the time tonight and when we do constitute a board, if need be, to tweak, change, modify, or do anything further with this. We have the opportunity then at that point to address those issues, concerns. Is that correct, Mr. McCree?
That's correct.
So that's just for an explanation for the audience, but I don't know. I didn't get that reading in there where we're going to be interacting with any board, advisory board. I think that still is remanded under state law to the county manager in the form of government that we have to operate the various departments that fall under his purview. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, I guess, and we can tweak the language, absolutely. But when I read language that says recommend to the Board of Commissioners projects and programs, et cetera, then that implies the Board of Commissioners is now going to take action based upon those recommendations. And those recommendations, I'm good.
Well,
we'll work
Mr. Beaumont, just when I was on the Recreation Board, that advisory board took recommendations about parks, activities, stuff to me to bring to the commissioners, to present that information to the commissioners. I that's why I just see this as the same issue. I mean, I'm not arguing with you, but I got it. Okay, you have a commissioner who's going to sit on that advisory board to bring that information to the other commissioners to help enlighten them to what's going on. That's the way I'm reading this. That's written here. So,
okay.
I think the chairman brought up a good point. In the second reading, I think we either got to adopt or table completely, right?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we have a motion and a second on the table
And
right
we do.
now. So-
And we do. You can
Well,
answer.
to Commissioner Beaumont, if this helps, this advisory board that you're creating is certainly going to be making recommendations that will impact Gina's budget. And I think that's where you will fund the operation, and she will be bringing through her budgetary process recommendation for funding for various different programs or activity. And I think that's where your influence, and because ultimately you're going to fund the department. And so by working with this advisory board and looking at different programmings and different things to do, different educational things, Gina will build her budget around those recommendations to be bringing them to you sort of more in that format than standing in front of you quarterly and presenting to you the trends of the animal population.
And I'm good with, I just don't want to convey an expectation that this board is going to bring a list to us and expect this board to make voting on, specific programs. Clearly, from a budgetary aspect, I completely understand, and I'm
Very
done.
good.
One last comment, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that I heard several times from speakers was a concern about the Board of Commissioners don't have experience in handling animals, don't have experience in grant writing, don't have experience in the care of the animals. And I think that this addresses some of that if we'll take a bigger picture here, that we do have people that'll have a animal care background. We'll have someone that knows how to handle animals. We've got someone that possibly could write grants, and then we're going to have some members at large. So I don't want us to also forget that there was a concern raised about we didn't have that background, and I think that's one of the things we wanted to relay to the community, that we were going to appoint people that would have some of those backgrounds. Now, do we need to tweak some of them? Maybe so. But I think tonight we probably need to move on, and then in our
retreat
we can discuss the whether it should be 2 or 3 and what background or whatever, and then you can make a modification at that time and move it forward tonight so that people can start putting in applications to be appointed.
I can support that.
And in the meantime, that moves it
Well,
forward.
that, if we're going to discuss and make appointments at our retreat, it's going to be a little difficult because that's less than a week and a half away.
No.
So
No, talk about it.
I just want to clarify that.
Talk
So-
about it.
I didn't say anything about making appointments. I said about the people,
Slots.
the slots on the thing at the
Talking about the
retreat.
makeup of the board.
Yeah, the
That's
makeup.
right, that's right.
So-
That's-
Mr. Scanlon, how many weeks is the retreat scheduled for?
You know, and just,
siesta.
You haven't got it scheduled in for 2 weeks, right?
It is growing.
Tell me.
Could you add this item to the list?
Yes, sir, we can.
As long as you're done by the first meeting in December, you can do it as long as you wish.
all right, well, just for, I think this board knows it, but I just for or for edification of the audience, if this wasn't, this composition of this advisory board was not taken out of whole cloth. It was a result of review of what other counties have done. It was following some of what has in the past worked and has proven to work. So I don't want anybody to think that we just sat in a room and somebody came up with these arbitrarily and out of left field. They're based on previous successful models. Now, with that being said, any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion and a second before us.
Chairman, could I speak for just a second?
Well, right, we this is not open for public comment at this point in time. This is for action, and we had comment and further advice. I mean, we're not set up. We're not set up for comment, but you're certainly able to. You're certainly more.
Motion in a second.
Yes, we got a motion and a second before us, so we've closed that. You can stay and talk in public, in the public comment portion.
I just want to try to clarify.
Okay, so, and we can do that later. But for the purpose now, we have a motion, a second, and I will ask all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have a unanimous vote. Now, let's move forward with this into new business. We have, first thing is external communication policy. With this, I will ask Mr. Scanlon to address this issue.
Mr. Chairman, you have in your agenda package a proposed policy that was developed by the county staff. It has been reviewed by the county attorney and myself. This is formalizing a lot of what we have historically done and incorporating in it some new measures. This was developed after reviewing policies from other jurisdictions as well as communication with the School of Government. But this is a comprehensive communication policy that discusses pretty much every manner and method that the county staff and departments will communicate with the public. Under Section A, there is an outline of how the departments and the county will interact with the media outlets, the newspapers, radios, and the press. Section B is how we will interact with social media, whether it is the county website, Twitter accounts, and we are venturing into the wonderful world of Facebook. And so this will set out the policies and procedures in which the county will operate under that. I will note throughout the policy, you will see various different references. This policy does not cover and represent the sheriff's office. The sheriff speaks for her department, and so there's nothing in this policy that is applicable specifically to the sheriff's department. Under item C, it talks about the county website and how the county website will be maintained. Under D, it talks about how the PEG channels, the governmental channels that we have on our various cable televisions, that section is predominantly controlled by the FCC, but it's codified here in your policy. Under E, the county is slowly accumulating more and more digital signage, and this will control what and how we use digital signage as a mean of conveying information. It goes on to talk about employees' use of social media and when it is a personal comment and when it is a county or business-related comment, what is allowable and what is not allowable. It talks about all of this is considered a public record, regardless of whether it is on a personal computer or whether it is on a work computer is irrelevant. It establishes the clerk to the Board of Commissioners as the official holder of public records. It speaks to branding. It speaks to all of your departments, how they represent their departments graphically. It actually recognizes only 2 logos as official logos of Currituck County, the seal, which is on the county flag and on your dais in front of you. That is to be used on all official county business. If it's not official county business, the one that the seal that we have on at the water tanks, the 2 geese, is permissible. No other seals or logos can be used to represent Currituck County government without the approval of this policy. And as of right now, the tourism department has a recognized logo that they're approved to use. It talks about how county will use email, what is acceptable formatting of email, what is acceptable fonts to use as emails. It covers just about everything that we do as far as communicating with, again, the general public and the media, and it is put in front of you for your consideration, and I'll be happy to answer any specific questions you might have.
Any questions?
What's your recommendation?
My recommendation is for approval.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion by Commissioner Eidler, a second by Commissioner Gilbert. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Move to the next item. This is the Knott's Island Volunteer Fire Department Grant Agreement Amendment. Again, Mr. Scanlon.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. On April of 2015, the Board of Commissioners approved the county entering into a grant agreement with the Knott's Island Volunteer Fire Department for the acquisition of a piece of equipment. They were going to trade in a used piece to be used as the base of the building of the newer piece. They have unfortunately run into some problems with the chassis that they were committed to the project. They had to change vendors. And I sent you an email last month on this, where they are asking now if the board would consider increasing the grant. Originally, it was $160,000. They're asking for an additional $26,000 to support modifications on this piece of equipment, so that the total grant now would be $186,000. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board might have.
Just to clarify, part of a small portion of that is for the having to change vendors, something to do with the chassis. The first vendor they went with sent the wrong chassis and then would not do the right thing, so they had to go somewhere else. But the majority of the money is to make a couple change orders. They're rehabbing a truck's what they're doing, a tanker, and what their plans are, as they got looking at this, they can do 1 or 2 of these modifications that will allow this thing to become a dual-purpose unit, to where it can be used as their secondary reserve pumper as well as a tanker both. So if the most every department there is around has a backup pumper, so as it is now, it will allow them to get rid of one other piece of equipment. So they'll end up with just their new pumper that they got, plus this piece will then fill the need as the secondary or reserve pumper, as well as the tanker unit itself as well. So makes sense to me what they're doing, and so I support it.
Mr. Scanlon, if the fire department had to purchase this brand new, what kind of approximate price tag would they be looking at?
Ooh,
$350 to $400.
$400,000.
I know recently another department was approved, and you were in the $350,000 range.
So yeah, just to make a point, I mean, this is a lot saving for the and they can. I mean, this can. I mean, I'm a volunteer firefighter. I've worked with used and other. I mean, these can work out just as well as a brand new piece.
Yeah, basically, when it's done, that's what it'll be.
And as the commissioner's representative on the fire advisory board, I too would recommend approval.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I will.
Motion to approve.
I'll second
Second.
that.
We have a motion from Commissioner Idlet, a second by Commissioner Payment to approve as read. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Just to let everyone know now, this is not giveaway money. They're paying this money back, correct?
Right, sir.
Yeah, just for the public.
Okay.
This is a loan.
Okay, that was unanimously passed. The next item on our agenda is board appointments, and the first one is Recreational Advisory Board. I see Commissioner Gilbert and Commissioner Hall. Is that correct, or?
I'm not ready to make mine this evening.
All right.
And I would like to recommend Kevin McCord. Mr. Freely is not able to continue on. He's had his 2 terms.
Okay. So Commissioner Hall has Kevin McCord as his appointee. I will ask
Second
that's your
that.
motion, and Commissioner Gilbert seconds it. I'll ask the board at this point for a vote. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimously. And just for note for the record, Commissioner Gilbert's will continue hers to a later date.
Yeah, and Mr. Pickerel will continue to serve until I find a replacement.
Okay, very good. Senior Citizens Advisory Board, I have an appointment, and so does Commissioner Hall. I will ask that this be continued as well at this time for my appointment.
And I would like to reappoint Marcia Steele to the Senior Citizens Advisory Board.
That is your
Second.
motion?
Yes.
Second? All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. We have consent agenda.
Move for approval.
We have a motion by Commissioner O'Neill, second by Commissioner Gilbert. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Commissioners report. Commissioner O'Neill.
Yes, sir. I have been contacted by several people in our community about Virginia no longer recognizing concealed carry permits from North Carolina. And it's my understanding Senator Cook has written a letter to the governor of Virginia as well as the Attorney General, and some other legislators are working on that. We have quite a few people if you go from Knott's Island to all through here that are in Virginia all the time that no longer would be considered legal with their concealed carry. I asked that we have a resolution. I don't think you asked in time enough to get it prepared. So I would ask that we pass a resolution supporting our legislative efforts in Raleigh to have North Carolina's concealed carry permits recognized in Virginia again.
Second, if you need a second.
I think that's excellent because we're right on the border of Virginia,
Right.
and a concern that I have is that while it has been published publicly, there may be people who, for whatever reason, haven't heard it and will inadvertently, thinking that they can carry, will find themselves in a precarious situation in Virginia, and I worry about that. But I would wholeheartedly concur with Commissioner O'Neill. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Any other comments?
Yeah, Mr. Griggs, as everyone's aware, we had a tragic accident in Lower Currituck again this past week where a young person was killed. again, I'm sure you've had some of the same conversations. There is a concern in Lower Currituck about the lack, and this a traffic light probably would not have made a difference on this particular accident, but it just brings back the conversation of something to break the traffic up a little bit in Lower Currituck. There's a lot of areas down there when you go around the curve, people are going 65 and 70 miles an hour, and you pull out and suddenly you're in trouble. The post office there in Harbinger is a prime example. So I just want to raise that issue again, and I know since I've been on the board, we've written, I don't know how many letters, passed how many resolutions, had how many discussions, but also with the loss of a life, even though it was traffic light, had nothing to do with it, it has brought that issue up again. So I'd like the board to go on record again to DOT to look at the safety concerns in Lower Currituck.
Okay, is that in the form of a motion?
If you would like, sir, we'll
It
call
doesn't
it.
have to, if it needs to be, if it
I
does
think
not.
you can direct the
We can
manager
direct
to write a
staff
letter.
to construct a resolution.
We can do it by letter to NCDOT.
That'll be fine.
That's it.
All right. Commissioner Payment.
Well, just to, we're on the subject of the fire departments. Lower Currituck this Thursday is going to be having an open house at Station 5 in Grandy. They welcome the public to come in, see the station, talk to the staff, the personnel there. It's just going to be at 7 o'clock prior to their business meeting. So anybody who's interested of becoming a volunteer, helping with the traffic we have in the summertime and the fires and getting involved, whether it's a part-time basis or with the women's auxiliary or whatever, that would be a great time to come out there and show your support, talk to them, and come see the station and meet some of the folks down there. Again, it's this Thursday at 7 o'clock, and I will be there as one of the members down there. And I'd like to see as many people as we could come out to that event. And secondly, I just want to make everyone aware, we're starting getting into some cold weather. And just remember the elderly folks out there and make phone calls, check on them, check on people that you may know, make sure they're okay in these cold weathers, because there's some people out there that may have heating issues or staying warm, and we just need to make sure we look out for those folks. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilbert.
I would just like to add to the letter that you're sending to DOT, Dan. We have addressed this, but again, just like Commissioner O'Neill, I want to go on record. The pavement that was supposed to be repaved in Moyock that's not marked, it is an issue with traffic staying in their lanes because there's a big portion that's unmarked. And so, I know that after the tourist season, they were supposed to come in and pave and mark that portion, but there's still, and I was thankfully not in an accident, but it was a close call in front of me the other day, and it's people driving down the center of the road.
We can get your status report on that.
If you would, please. Second thing is just a reminder, this Saturday, the Moyock Women's is sponsoring the Frosty Toes Run, and it's rain, shine, sleet, or snow, and it's a possibility there might be sleet or snow there. So just pack up warm, and it'll make you move quicker. Starts at 9 o'clock, and with Airport Road being closed, you would need to come in through either Community Way or, what's the other, Dan?
We have Barco Way.
Or in Barco Way.
College Way.
And parking's at the College of the Albemarle.
Thank you. Commissioner Beaumont.
I had the pleasure of attending the Northern Regional Advisory Board meeting with Trillium Health Resources. That was formerly the, mental health board, basically, for this region of the county. Part of what the discussions centered on during those meetings, or at least on the sidebars, concerned the drain on law enforcement resources on getting individuals beds within the state of North Carolina. I was not the only one that's been pounding on that drum. They are well aware of the challenges facing the county, and so that is being worked from a institutional level. But I had the pleasure of hearing a presentation on the mobile crisis center, which we've actually, I believe, as a board, have actually been able to listen to that, and they exhorted Currituck County as one of the best utilizers of that resource in this region of North Carolina. And for those that are not aware, the Mobile Crisis Center, there aren't many options available to law enforcement if they're called out to someone that's having an issue. Notably, I think law enforcement either arrests them. Actually, I don't think they have an option. They basically typically would arrest them and bring them in for evaluation. With the mobile center or mobile crisis, they can actually intervene and prevent someone from being dragged off to jail to be booked and then brought over to a mental institution to then be evaluated. So they specifically called out how effective Currituck County has been doing that at a significant savings of money. So good on Currituck and Sheriff Johnson. She is actually being asked to help talk to some of the other counties who are less eager to use those mobile crisis facilities. So kudos to Sheriff Johnson. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Hall.
Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to the seniors and people that are less fortunate, isn't there a program that's available for helping them with fuel oil or heating bills or anything else?
There is a program through social services. Well, it's a federally funded program operated through social services, the LEAP program, that can help. I believe maybe it's a one-time with heating bills.
So if you know somebody like that that doesn't have heat or something that might fit this criteria, folks, don't feel like you can't, do something to try to help them, because going without heat, especially when it's 20 and 25 degrees, it's just unbelievable. And then also remember, with these cold spells, your pets, the ones that you would leave outside, please remember also their water freezes, so remember to check that as well. And as Commissioner Payment said, check on your loved ones. A phone call, just say, hey, how are you doing when this time of the weather hits, especially with snow possibly being in the forecast. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Idlet.
We got an RPO meeting coming up the end of the month. I don't know what what the ferry tolling situation will look like when it comes up. I've tried to get in touch with Angela a couple times and not been able to talk with her, but I'll keep trying. But other than that, I don't have anything else tonight.
Okay. One thing, it was in our packet in the weekly report, but I'll reiterate this. The county and trust are entering into an architectural service contract for the schematic design of a boat facility at Wellhead. The architect will work with a boat committee. It's consisting of Carl Ross, Travis Morris, Mike Doxey, Penny Leary Smith, Tamarin Kugler, and myself as an advisory to the board. Michelle Perry, the county engineer, will facilitate this project on behalf of the county. A schematic rendering, along with the proposed location, will be presented to the full trust for concurrence and then presented to the Board of Commissioners for approval. Once approved, the project will move forward with full drawings, permitting, bidding, and construction. Now, that'll conclude my comments, and I will at this point move to public comment. Please limit comments to matters other than those appearing on this agenda as a public hearing. Public comments are limited to 5 minutes. I have a sign-up sheet. First on it is David. Is it Nolt?
Knock.
He left. He was here for the large structure conversation.
Was it something I said? Okay, Bill Cole, or Collins, I'm sorry, Bill Collins.
He was here also for
He
the
left
large
as well.
structure and left.
They were two with the Corolla.
Okay. Marie Long,
Marie's still here.
I'm actually a little bit like a dog with a bone. That's why I'm still here. And I also, don't start my timer yet. Mr. Knock left me his notes of what he had wanted to say and his little pamphlet about the wedding. When I'm done, if I could just pass that to y'all, you can do whatever you want to it, but I don't want to let him down. I'm Marie Long. My address is 1437 Ocean Pearl in the off-road area. And I will identify myself also by saying that I am the person in the Latondre court case that you fixed the rental issue on tonight. But there is a lot more to our case. I think Mr. McCree would admit that too. And that has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about. I just wanted to get that out there. But I am here about the large residential structures, and because I do really have sort of a personal experience going on with it. This is a 24-bedroom, large LRS, I guess we're calling them, being built next to me, still under construction. And that is here nor there with me anymore. It is what it is. It's going to be what it is. That's whatever. So I'm looking to the future, which is what all of you all are doing, looking at all this. And first of all, I did want to thank Ben and Lori and all their staff. I've driven them crazy, but it's made me realize how much work is really, really involved. This is not a simple thing. And I want to thank specifically Mr. Adlet for 3 months ago saying, I want it in 3 months. And I want to thank all of you all tonight. I'm so excited that you're going to talk about it at your work session. Hopefully it's going to come up at the next meeting. I've been dealing personally with this thing for 3.5 years, so I'm not really a very patient person. But the reason I wanted to speak is just to, one of the things we didn't talk about too much is if you are an existing homeowner affected by one of these, and that is what I am. And there was a couple things in the monkey survey. There was the most concerning impact was size, compatibility, and overall scale and bulk. And I will say that there was a time when I would have said to you, I don't really care about that. That's not my issue because I have some other issues. Having now listened to what everybody's saying and being next to this, it does matter. And I'll tell you why as we go along. Under option 2, where you could modify dimensional and developmental standards for houses over 5,000 square feet, that's something that for an existing home, which is what I have, would really make a difference for us. And I'm probably going to say something that sounds a little bit crazy, but it comes to my mind that let's say where these homes are located can matter, and putting them between two single-family residences, which is where this project that affects me is, as opposed to next to a project all of like kind, that may be something you all want to talk about. I have some homes up from me that I host events and stuff, but they're next to each other. And one man owns a couple of them, as a matter of fact. They're not this size, but the impact on something might be a little different for those. And then we have the Wild Horse. That's the 23-bedroom. That's on 10 acres. And I hear people talk all the time. It's surrounded by undeveloped acreage, which means if someone comes in to build next to it, they know what they're getting into. The opposite happened with me. I'm sitting there in my house that I plan on retiring in, and everything changes for me. And an example is the changing of the area eastward of the frontal dune makes a dramatic difference in the size of a lot on the ocean front. All 3-acre lots are not alike. A 3-acre lot that's a square is really different than the 3-acre lots in my area that are rectangles, and you squeeze the house in, and it literally goes from one side to the other and all the way as far as you can see. Then you get into the issue of wetlands. And the other thing is the septic capacity, which I think really is probably going to come up, if it hasn't already, with the state. There's some question about the occupancy on a regular basis, as well as when you once a week suddenly get occupancy that doubles and triples what's going on there because of these weekly events. And I'm going to finish real quick here. I did want to point out, too, that where I live, which is in the first section of the off-road, There are currently, within my first mile, 11 undeveloped oceanfront lots. In the next half mile past that, there are currently 9 undeveloped oceanfront lots. I really, really, really don't want to see them made up of all these large residential structures. And I'm speaking for myself, but also for other people that will be affected, sort of on a personal note that way. But I'm a big off-road fan, which is not something we did not address, which maybe will come up in your work session. Anyway, my time's running out, so I'm finishing by thanking you very much, and hopefully you can help me in the future. Thanks very much. Oh, and here's...
Thank you, Ms. Long. And Ms. Belcher.
My name is Beverly Belcher. I live at 126 East Canvasback Drive, Currituck. I am the director of the Currituck SPCA. The Currituck SPCA is still thriving nicely, and we're trying to raise funds to help with any medical treatment that people in the community need for their animals or animals at the shelter. When I started at the shelter, we had an advisory council, and if it hadn't been for them, we wouldn't have been as successful as we were. If I had just gone in and said, I'm going to do this, it would never worked. Because of the advisory council that I had, we didn't have a board. It wasn't set up the same as Animal Lovers Assistance League. The SPCA was quite different. The advisory council put their fingers out to the community, and when the community got involved, all heck broke loose. Dogs started getting adopted. Cats started getting adopted. Dogs were walked every day. Cats were played with every day. Food was brought in by the droves. All we had to do was post one little thing on Facebook, and people were there the next day. When we had the fire, there were probably 100 people walked in the door. 50 that night, 50 the next morning. So I think an advisory council is important to pull people together, to pull the community in, because the more involvement you have from the community, the better this shelter is going to be. This could be a model shelter. It really could be. It's beautiful. It's set up nicely. You have an awesome staff. And I just really think it could be a great place. I want to continue the SPCA for the reasons I said. I want to help as much as I can for anything positive to happen over there, because I am an animal advocate, big time. And so I ask you to consider making sure that when you accept people onto the advisory board, that they are people in the community who can connect up to other people in the community, and they can connect up to other people in the community. Because the 1 year that I was with the SPCA at that little small building was phenomenal. We have over 4,000 likes on Facebook, for those of you who know anything about Facebook. In 1 year, that was crazy. We had a 10% youth rate, which for the most part, most shelters in North Carolina have a 50. The OBX SPCA has 12%. But they get $625,000 a year for help. The reason for that was because people came together, supported each other, and the advisory council put their fingertips out there. We had a photographer, we had a builder, we had an electrician. It just worked well that way. Educator. I did write an email, I hope all of you received, that talked about educator. The schools, we need to teach our children how to take better care of their animals, because they're going to be the future Currituck people who are going to be working at the shelter, who are going to be dealing with the shelter. And believe it or not, I taught school for 20 years, public schools and private. Kids do not understand how to treat animals. They're not taught how to do that at home unless they're raised on a farm or have parents that are very compassionate towards them. So there's a lot of bullying and a lot of violence that goes on. And if you can get to the children and help them to understand that being compassionate to other people, starts with that very animal. We've taken rescue animals into schools, and the teachers have said, wow, our kids calmed down for a whole month after you were here, because they understand what it's like to take care of something else and to make sure that they know how to take care of something else. And I'm just here to tell you, as an educator and as a mother of 2 sons and 4 grandchildren, that is where it all begins. We have dogs and cats. My kids have dogs and cats. And the kids are wonderful. They're very compassionate and they're very caring. So that's where I think it needs to start. And then as far as an advisory council goes, I think we need to serve the pleasure of the board, but they don't want you to have to be involved in every sector of it. But it will get the community involved. So thank you. I appreciate it. And the shelter's beautiful. I was there today, and it was really awesome to be there and see. It's going to work out really well. And I don't even feel like we have any cats there anymore. Before, it was like cats were coming out of the eaves of the building, and I'm looking for the cats today. So thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Certainly.
Ms. Belcher, I think you hit on something big, and that's education with the children. I think that is so very important, exactly what you're saying, and on both sides, for the kids as well as teaching them about animals as well. You're on point. Thanks.
One of the things that happened when we got into the shelter, and it just really took me aback, is the teachers started calling me and emailing me. And I put my phone number and my email out there, and they were like, we want you here. We want you to come in the school. And we had so many, and they were very disappointed that we couldn't take the time because we worked so hard on making that shelter as good as we could make it, that we couldn't take the time we needed to get into the schools.
Hopefully now, with all the volunteer efforts that we're hearing about that wants to be a part of it and participate, maybe they can be a branch of some kind that can break off that we'll take that and run with that piece and the various other pieces, like Mr. Hall was saying. It's going to take a collaborative effort to be successful.
You will have a model shelter when it's finished. You really will. And I'm looking forward to being a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else that is signed up. Is there anyone that failed to sign up that wishes to say something now? If not, I'm going to recess Currituck County Board of Commissioners meeting, and I'm going to call to order the special meeting of the Tourism Development Authority. And as such, I will recognize Ms. Kugler.
Everyone have a nice evening.
You cleared the room.
Don't have any concerns about what we're going to discuss, that's all.
Okay. Who will do the presentation?
You're sitting now as a Tourism Development Authority, and you have in your agenda package, you had 3 budget amendments. Commissioner Hall has asked if we remove one for the time being, so you have 2, which we'll speak to. The first one I'm going to ask Ms. Kugler to speak to, the $1,500.
Thank you. We are asking for a budget amendment to capital outlay of $1,500. This is in the wellhead budget from the promotions budget in order to purchase a indoor-outdoor dance floor. We're looking at this.
You said that with a straight face.
I did. This came up because we're getting ready to do our Memorial Day Beach Blast again. And we have a band coming in. It's for North Carolina shagging. We have a lot of people who like to dance, and it'll just give them a better floor on which to do that. And we'll also, And we'll also be using it for July 4th.
Dance.
And it's also something that we also will make available to any other departments in the county that needs it, as we do with our movie screen and other things that we have. I think we're getting a 30 by 30. 30 by 30.
And the cost to
900
rent one
square
to
feet.
that size is, I mean, it's up there close to.
You know what? I'm not really sure what the rental companies charge for the floors. It's probably around $500 to $600.
I said,
So
if we use it 2 or 3 times, it's paid for.
it's paid for. And one of the other things that we've been kicking around is for our Christmas tour next year is the possibility of having a hunt dinner or hors d'oeuvres, and also having somebody come in and teach people how to do the Charleston and some of the other dances of the 20s. So that'll be something that we'll have available, and we'll be able to do that. Yeah. So I would like for the board to entertain allowing me to do this budget amendment.
Did you price any larger floors? I mean,
Well, I think when you get too much larger than that, because we're looking at 30 by 40, and the way we did this is we pasted out in the
30 by 40.
Yeah, 30 by 40. We pasted out in the tourism department, and it just gets a little unwieldy just in terms of just moving it. We are buying a cart to move that with, but just storage and moving, it's big enough without being too big. So it
40 is pretty good size. Yeah.
She's getting a 30.
I'm getting a 30 by 30. Yeah.
I'd vote in favor of it if we have one caveat, and that would be that Mr. O'Neill will be the first one to demonstrate on it.
I would love to do that, and we'll have our videographer
I'm a short
out
timer.
there.
I don't have nothing to lose. I'll go out there. Oh, Lord.
Mr. Chairman, you have in your package another budget amendment. At your previous meeting, sitting as a TDA, you approved the contract for the multi-use path in Corolla, and you have in your agenda package tonight the budget amendment to set that project up so that we can go ahead and approve the contract and move forward, and that's in the amount of $1.8 million. The staff will be happy to answer any questions on those 2 budget amendments you might have.
Do you recommend approval?
Yes, sir, I do.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we approve the amendments as requested.
Second, those.
We have a motion by Commissioner O'Neill, second by Commissioner Idlet. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimously, both budget amendments were passed. At this time, do we have any further business?
No,
for
sir, you do not.
I did want to, I believe at our last meeting, we had brought up a letter to Senator Cook about, for consideration of the, I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
Of the personal property tax that was.
Yes, sir.
We would need to recess the TDA meeting and reconvene
I'm
as
sorry,
a
I
Board
have
of
no
Commissioners.
TDA business to discuss.
Hearing none, I will close the special meeting of the Tourism and Development Authority, and I will reconvene the regular meeting of the Currituck County Board of Commissioners. Commissioner Beaumont.
Commissioner Beaumont, that letter is being prepared to be forwarded, and we have met with the other counties in northeast North Carolina, and they have all concurred with it, and we'll be sending a similar letter in support of that.
Thank you.
Any further business? Hearing none, Chair will entertain a motion to go into closed session pursuant to GS 143-318.11 sub A, sub 5, or paragraph 5, to establish or instruct county staff concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the county in negotiating the material terms of a contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase or exchange owned by the United States Fish and Wildlife Services to be used for any public purpose. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Do I have a second? A second. We have a motion by Commissioner Gilbert, a second by Commissioner Beaumont. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Closed session.